Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is 5 Petals in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1. This is not supposed to be happening. Sakura had expected many things when Sasuke was assigned to her team. She'd expected daring rescues and escapes, Sasuke to be sweeping her off her feet with how effortless he made everything seem, him protecting her whenever she was put in harm's way. Their most daring escape yet came of Sasuke stabbing himself in the thigh. This is not supposed to be happening. All of Sakura's images of her teammates aren't supposed to be crashing down around her. She watches Sasuke fight the strange snake woman who had put Naruto out of commission with a single strike to the stomach, following them as best she can through the trees, but a part of her feels miles away as her mind struggles to put together what she's seen. Naruto had once again proved himself to be brave and true despite everything the world and she had thought about him, fighting and refusing to give up, standing firm where Sasuke had stepped back. Perfect hero and prodigy Sasuke had nearly no. There was no nearly about it. He'd given up. He'd surrendered. He'd surrendered for all of them, and balked in the face of danger until she'd screamed at him to go back into the fight. And then there's her. She'd called Sasuke a coward, but is she any better? All she's done is stand on the sidelines, weeping and screaming. Perfect student with a gift for genjutsu, smart and talented with all the potential in the world, once in a generation mind Sakura Haruno had stood by and watched while her teammates handled everything. She tenses and readies a cry as she spots the substitution a second before Sasuke, but it dies in her throat when the packets of black powder ignite and she finally notices Sasuke's web of wires. Had he been setting this up the whole time? Why didn't she notice that? She's supposed to be observant. She's supposed to be intelligent. But she didn't notice Sasuke leading the snake woman on a deliberate path and weaving an intricate trap. For a second she convinces herself it was genjutsu that hid it from her, but that's no excuse. Sasuke's genjutsu technique dips just slightly below average. If she didn't sense it before now, that only proved that she was nowhere as good as she thought. She feels the heat from the dragon flame, but she can't be happy for Sasuke when her mind is still spinning. What good was she this whole time? What good has she ever been? What is she good for when all she does is stare at Sasuke and Naruto's backs while they thunder ahead? She clenches her fist tight and bounds down to Sasuke's side. She can't find out if she doesn't start moving. Her voice comes out in a pale imitation of cheer as she stops next to Sasuke. You did it. You okay? Don't worry, it's all over. Even before the snake woman stirs, Sakura doesn't quite believe that. She hears the wire snap and feels the familiar crushing grip of the jutsu that had stunned them back at the fight's beginning as she stumbles forward onto her knees. This time her brain gets to work immediately. Not a leaf form of genjutsu, most likely tricks the subject's fight or flight response, forces you to freeze in the face of imaginary danger. Evidently the snake woman wasn't in the mood to invent a danger this time. Sasuke forces the words out of his throat. No. Impossible. The snake woman moves in one swift leap to a branch several yards away. Sakura can see now that her face has been severely burned, so severely that the skin is peeling away. She can see a small corner of unmarred, pure white flesh through a hole in the skin, and a golden eye. It feels familiar, like a photograph from a textbook, or a torn-out page hastily tucked away in the back cover of an academy yearbook in a dusty storeroom. Her voice shifts down into that of a man's as she speaks. Such mastery of the Sharingan at so young an age, you're a true Uchiha after all. Yes, you'll do nicely. All Sasuke can do is choke out a roar as he tries desperately to move, to fight against the jutsu like he had before, but he had much more stamina and chakra back then. The woman? The man? The ninja continues on like they're talking to themselves. You are definitely his brother. If anything, your eyes are even keener than Ataka's. That name, that cursed name that Sakura suddenly stopped hearing the morning after the Uchiha clan's population went down to 1, gives Sasuke strength enough to shout, "Who are you? What do you want?" They chuckle, tossing the heaven scroll like it's a ball. My name is Orochimaru. But as to what I want, that will have to wait until we meet again. Green flame starts to spread across the heaven scroll, taking bites out of it until it's fully consumed, which won't happen until you finish this test with the best score of all. The words tumble dumbly out of Sakura's mouth. The scroll. Orochimaru doesn't even acknowledge her. First, you'll have to defeat the hidden sound ninja who serve me. Sakura's mortally wounded pride won't let that stand. So she barks, I have no idea what you're talking about, but if you've finished why don't you just beat it? If we never meet again it'll be too soon. His voice comes out in a slither, oh, he and I will meet again. His hands form a seal and his neck shoots upwards as it extends, head looping through the air towards Suzuki with his mouth open wide in a horrible grin. The world slows down around her as Sakura's mind works at a breakneck pace. This is genjutsu binding her strength, especially when she's seen it before. She's seen how Suzuki broke its hold when it was far stronger and applied with far greater care. And now Sakura has something she's never had before, something to prove to herself. So she bites down on the side of her tongue, hard enough that she immediately tastes blood. She shoves herself up and she runs blindly forward with none of the grace she'd like but all the passion, all the fury and speed she has to spare. Her vision narrows down to a single point: Suzuki. Several things happen all at once in less than a minute's time. Sakura's elbow slams into Suzuki's side from an angle he doesn't anticipate, sending him tumbling end over end off the branch. Suzuki rights himself just a second too late, and without checking where he's going to land when he does his knee twists, he feels a lightning bolt of pain shoot from his soul to his head, his leg gives out. And Orochimaru's teeth sink down to the gum in Sakura's shoulder. He rips them out with a ferocity and urgency he never would have used on sweet and soft little Suzuki, but he's too late. A small black flower, 5 petals all pointing out from an empty heart, blossoms between the holes where his fangs had been. Sakura's knees buckle immediately and she pitches forward, swooning off the branch. He prays that she'll land head first and save him a whole mess of time and trouble, but bright and brilliant little Suzuki breaks into a limping sprint and catches her in the nick of time. He glares up at Orochimaru, cherry non-burning, bad leg, and unconscious girl in his arms, all that's keeping him from leaping up and tearing his teeth out of his mouth. Orochimaru retreats into the shadows with a sneer and knowledge he would be the first to gain. Do not turn your back on Sakura Haruno. This isn't supposed to be happening. That's all Suzuki can think as the adrenaline peters out and he sets about the agonizing task of collecting his team. It's a task that shouldn't be agonizing, but thanks to Sakura's split-second decision he has to climb back up to Naruto by carefully channeling what remains of his chakra into his good foot and the arm not holding her. Between the pace and the pain it's enough to make Suzuki fall into a running narration of profanity as he inches up to Naruto. He wants to blame Sakura. He wants to call her stupid and foolish and impulsive, and when he caught her he almost did. But the words had died in his throat when he noticed she was breathing short, shallow breaths, eyes barely open and glazed over, her temperature spiking up to dangerous levels in the seconds between Orochimaru biting her and Suzuki catching her. She keeps twitching, fidgeting, making pain sounds, but never rousing. Whatever's happening to her would have been happening to him if she hadn't done something. And considering he'd been the one Orochimaru was aiming for, who knows what could have happened if he'd hit his mark. The thought leaves Suzuki feeling very cold. Naruto is also unconscious and shows no signs of waking, not even after Suzuki succumbs to his frustration and slaps him. Twice. Hard. With both hands occupied by people in critical condition and a leg that only hurts worse the longer he keeps trying and failing not to put weight on it, Suzuki is forced to carefully navigate the interweaving branches down to the forest floor, and settles for rolling Naruto and Sakura into the first hollow in a tree he can find. Despite how his wounded pride is growling and snarling at him to find Orochimaru and strangle him with his own tongue, his wounded knee is telling him that this is as far as he's getting. Suzuki regrets paying only the barest amount of attention when Medic Ninja came into the academy to teach them basic field medicine, because after staring at Sakura and Naruto for 5 minutes of silence he has to admit that he has no idea what to do for them. He doesn't even know what to do for himself. He rifles through Naruto and Sakura's packs and the medical supplies they have on them are limited to the bare minimum necessary to plug up bleeding cuts, nothing he can use to wrap up a sprained, or worse, knee. All he can find for Sakura's fever is some rags and a small canister of water which he clumsily uses to get a rag wet and put on Sakura's forehead like he remembered his mother doing for him when he was sick. And Naruto's problem is the polar opposite. He's ice cold, sleeping so soundly that he almost looks dead. Suzuki's checked his pulse 4 times now, it's so sluggish he almost misses it each time. Whatever Orochimaru did to him with that strike goes far beyond the reach of Suzuki's half-remembered knowledge of field medicine. Suzuki leans back against the roots sheltering his team. The sun set quite a while ago now, his chakra reserves are slowly coming back, he could go out and look for food or help. Sasuke tries to stand, and this time his leg doesn't even let him start to put weight on it. He comes tumbling back down into the dirt before he can even get halfway out of the hollow. And for a moment, Sasuke just sits there, staring ahead into space, thinking about how it's been a very long time since he's felt quite this helpless. He shuffles back out of sight. Carefully, humbly, Sasuke makes the hand signs for a very basic genjutsu, one that should make the hollow look empty to the naked eye. A part of him wonders why he's bothering. Sakura would have done it better. Sasuke Uchiha, alone in the dark, takes a shuddering breath in, and waits. This is not supposed to be happening. Orochimaru had planned this for years. Every step of this coup and his personal project to find a new, perfect host had been orchestrated with such precision and accuracy it had even scared him a little, and then of course this happens. He has to talk himself down as his body sinks into the trunk of the great tree, the moonlight making his exposed flesh look positively ghostly, as he stews and simmers in impotent rage. It's just his luck, isn't it? He runs through hundreds of worthless candidates. Itaka proves himself too willful to be taken, Kimimaro is too frail, and perfect Sasuke is yanked from his grasp by some clanless child of civilians who would die before the night was through. Nothing else for it. Sasuke will have to be taken by force. The girl has a 1 in 100 chance of living, but he'll have Sound Ninja kill her quickly and take her body back for study. If there was anything interesting about the poor clanless fool, it was that her particular curse would further his research. She should be proud. It's probably the most honor her family will ever receive. He feels Anko's presence before she touches down on the branch and greets her through gritted teeth. Not that I don't appreciate you coming to welcome me home, Anko, but let's keep it short. Sensei has had a very difficult day and is in no mood for games. Anko bares her teeth in a fierce grin. Good, neither am I. Ordinarily he'd toy with her, set up a substitution for her to throw around to get her confidence up before bringing it down again, but he's in no mood. He melts into the tree as she tosses the senbon she'd primed in her offhand, distantly hearing them clatter against the wood as he quickly slithers around to rise up behind her. With a single half-seal, he reaches out and takes hold of her curse mark, freezing her in place and forcing a pained groan out from her gritted teeth. Anko's hand flies up to her neck, already doubling over as the pain shoots through her like lightning. Orochimaru glares at her back as she falls to her knees. I have no more patience for upstart little girls trying to be more than they are, Anko. Perhaps I should have learned that lesson better with you. She meets his eyes over her shoulder, still burning defiant despite her complete disadvantage. Why are you here? Did you come back to assassinate Lord Hokage? Orochimaru can't help but snort at how pedestrian that question is. Of course not, I don't have nearly the manpower to do something like that. In fact, I'd come here looking for more, but my plans have been thrown slightly off course. There was an absolutely wonderful boy I had my eye on. I'd even had the same gift I gave you all ready to give to him. But it's been wasted on one of his friends, a girl of absolutely no consequence who'll likely die before morning. Anko has the unmitigated gall to actually smirk up at him through the pain. Yeah? Don't count her out yet. I survived, didn't I? Orochimaru disguises the jolt of shock that shoots up his spine by stomping on Anko's back with one foot, shoving her face down into the bark of the tree and sending another shot of pain through her curse mark for good measure. Anko cries out, her yowl like that of a cat with its tail caught in a mousetrap. Anko's a filthy, defiant little stray, but she's also right. She had been even less than Sasuke's little pink hanger-on, a war orphan no one would lay claim to, because everyone had looked her over and seen nothing of any worth to claim. The only thing even he'd seen was that if Anko died in the experimentation process no one would come looking for her. But she'd survived. Out of 10 test subjects, many more healthy and promising than her, she'd clawed and scratched through and come out better. He cannot afford to let the same thing happen to Sakura. So instead he just smirks, forcing mirth and easiness into his voice as he drawls, but why would I want another worthless cast-off when I can instead have the sherry non? Now that gets the fear of heaven in Anko's eyes as they go wide and her breath catches on that name. Good. That's the look he wants to see in all his pupils' eyes. He leans casually over, resting an elbow on the knee propped up by Anko's back. By the way, 3 genin from my village are taking part in this exam. It would be an awful shame if the exams were cancelled before they could prove themselves, wouldn't it? It would just crush them, and well. I don't know what I would do if you took away my fun. Keep that in mind, won't you, Anko my dear? With that, he takes his foot off her back and turns on his heel, stalking off into the darkness. This is not supposed to be happening. And he's going to make sure it doesn't go any further. Chapter 2. Sasuke's honestly not sure how much sleep he ended up getting that night. It was more than none at all. He knows that much from all the times he started nodding off and shook himself back to consciousness, but definitely not enough to matter. He's hungry, he's exhausted, both are leading to his chakra regenerating at a sluggish pace, and his teammates still haven't woken. The most he'd been able to do was keep switching between the two rags he'd been using to keep Sakura's fever down, but the water in the canister is running low. The pain in his knee has come down to a consistent ache, but experimentally putting pressure on it turns that ache so sharp he doubts he could stand. Sasuke's throat feels agonizingly dry. He'd been trying to worry mostly about his teammates, for once, so he wouldn't contemplate exactly how bad it could get if he left his knee like this. His reflexes, however, are perfectly fine. He finds as the rustling of a bush and a dart of brown in the corner of his eye lead to him palming and throwing a kunai in its path before he can stop himself. His Sharingan flashes, then sputters out, just in time for him to catch that he'd nearly skewered a squirrel. A tiny one, too. Sasuke presses his face into his hands and groans, "I'm losing my mind." Do you think he noticed the explosive tag? Not likely. Look at him. He's fading fast. What a waste of good Uchiha blood. So it's time to strike. Soon. Just let him sweat for a little bit longer, and we'll have him right where we want him. The paper the ninja stuck to his back is burning now, and the squirrel runs and runs and runs as if the speed alone will put the fire out or tear the paper from his back. This forest was always a risk, foraging here was always dangerous, but usually in the way he expected, like from the tired boy. He knew how to avoid kunai and shuriken. But ninja knew how to catch squirrels when they needed them. And now he's being caught again, a hand covered in bandages that melt into a deep green grabbing him firmly but not crushingly out of the air. He squirms and squeaks and writhes to get out, but stops when the ninja's other hand swiftly plucks the paper off his back and shakes it hard enough to put out the fire. The world finally slows down and the squirrel considers the boy that caught him. Head fur cut into a straight line over his big round eyes and mouth in that friendly shape humans like, he opens his hand for the squirrel to sit in and escape should he choose. "There, you're safe now," he says. "Who did this to you, little fellow?" It doesn't take too advanced a mind to know this human is sweet. So he tells him of the ninja with the foreign smell who plucked him off the ground and put the tag on his back. He tells of how they sent him running at a tired boy guarding a sleeping girl with pink fur. When he mentions her, the sweet ninja's whole face changes, making the shapes humans made when they didn't like what they were hearing. "Please, little friend, can you show me the way there?" The squirrel considers. And he does. Sasuke wants to think he's finally passed out and having a nightmare when the three sound genin drop into the clearing, but he knows he's nowhere near lucky enough for that. Sasuke reads them quickly as he scrambles to cover as much of the tree hollow as he can, one hunched over with his face covered in bandages, one with spiky hair casually sitting on a big rock, and their female member with hair down past her waist. "Not much of a lookout if you're falling asleep on the job," Bandage Face growls, one eye locked on him. "At least you don't have to worry anymore now that we've found you." Spiky Hair One holds out a hand. "We'll make this nice and simple. Let us take the girl, and you and Blondie get to live to see 13. Sound fair?" Sasuke can only bring the Sharingan up for a brief. He hopes to have an intimidating, crimson flash as he hisses through gritted teeth, "No. Get lost before I make you get lost." The girl's laugh sounds like a broken, tinny bell. "Don't get cute, Uchiha. Right now you quite literally don't have a leg to stand on. Be smart. It'll be no big loss if you let us take her. We could even give you our scroll to sweeten the pot." Spiky Hair glares over at the girl. "Really, Kin? Do you want to give him our wallets too if he says no to that?" Kin rolls her eyes. "Get over yourself, Zaku. It's not like we can't find some other soft leaf genin to kill." Bandage Face narrows an eye at Zaku. "Remember our orders. She's priority number 1. Zaku's glare hardens, but he shoves his hand in his pants pocket and growls, "Got it, Dosa." For a moment he's not proud of. Sasuke pauses and considers how well he and Naruto could get on without Sakura. In theory, they could do fine. Between them both there's enough power and skill to beat back other genin or the beasts of the forest, and with them back to one scroll they'd no longer be at a disadvantage against their competition. In theory, they could pass this leg of the exams. But in practice he knows exactly what would happen. Naruto would wake up and lose his temper with him for letting Sakura go to her death and run off to save her. Sasuke would try to chase after him but never catch up on a bad leg. Best case, time would run out and they'd fail. Worst case, Naruto would get torn to shreds by the sound genin and Sasuke would get eaten by a giant forest snake. Surrender isn't an option this time. He digs in his heels and bares his teeth. The only way I'm moving from this spot is if you drag me away. Dosu's eye narrows in a grin that can definitely be arranged. They all leap at him at once, and with his chakra all but bottomed out Sasuke knows he only has one chance at stopping them, even if just in their tracks. His hands fly through the signs, he draws in enough air to fill his lungs twice over, and fire-style fireball jutsu. At this close Sasuke's vision is filled with bright blazing orange, like he's staring into the sun. He can feel the fire singing the tips of his hair, his elbows below his arm guards, even his knees, but he doesn't care. He just keeps pushing until his lungs are empty and he can't possibly make any more fire and he keeps pushing. He pushes until the fire pushes back. With a loud blast of noise and wind the flames come rushing around Sasuke and he barely gets his arms up in time to save his face. He feels bursts of lancing pain as licks of flame scorch through his shirt and across his legs but the wind as it keeps battering him puts them out before they can spread and destroy his clothes. The wind stops and Sasuke brings his arms down. Thankfully he hasn't started a forest fire, everything's too green for that, but bits of vegetation are smoldering on the edge of the clearing. Zuko stands directly across from Sasuke with a cocky grin, hands open wide to reveal a hole in each palm. So that's where the wind came from. Kin and Dosu stand on each flank, not even a dusting of soot on either one. Some genius, Zuko barks, you're just a run-of-the-mill dumb brute getting by on clan privilege. The family name won't do crap for you here, princess. He doesn't even have enough chakra to activate the Sharingan for half a second. Sasuke's jaw tenses and he draws a Kunao Orochimaru had wanted him to begin with, right? Well, if they wanted Sakura, they'd have to kill him to get her. One way or another he'd use his dying breath to tell Orochimaru to screw himself, and Itachi would know where to find him in hell. A blur of deep green, deeper than the whole forest, screams, leaf hurricane, as it strikes each sound genin hard in the chest and sends them slamming into trees and bushes on the clearing edge. Sasuke's mouth is smiling before he can tell it to stop and he's letting out a hoarse, giddy, breath of a laugh, no fucking way. Lee lands and immediately glares over his shoulder, do not think I came for you, Uchiha. His eyes fall on Sakura, just behind him. I made a promise, and I will keep it no matter the cost. Sasuke notices the squirrel perched quite comfortably on Lee's shoulder and he nearly laughs again. Lee leans down to gently let the squirrel dismount, and as he gets closer he murmurs to Sasuke, what has happened to her? Sasuke shakes his head, I don't know. Lee purses his lips, large brows furrowing at the news, or lack thereof, before he fixes Sasuke with a stare that pins him to the spot. I know you are exhausted, but she needs us now more than ever. I will fight, please, hold the line as best you can. The fire of Uchiha pride is easy to stoke, hard to soothe. It feels like measly sparks coming from nearly dead coals in the face of Lee's dark, honest eyes, brimming with emotion that should be beyond Lee's 13 years. Sasuke doesn't like to remember the life Itachi destroyed, but the only other time he's seen eyes like that is when his father looked at his mother. He respects it. But oddly, he doesn't like it. So he scoffs, make sure not to embarrass yourself in front of her. Lee bares his teeth in the sort of grin he imagines macaques used to intimidate rivals. Oh. Sasuke Uchiha, I do not like you. He fluidly straightens up into a fighting stance, his back to Sasuke and the sound genin where he'd been standing 2 days ago. Sasuke almost pities them. Dosu is the first to stand, stalking forward and pulling his long sleeve back to reveal an arm guard filled with holes. Zaku, Kin, you can have Sasuke. This one's mine. He charges the tree hollow again, and Sasuke expects Lee to meet him in the middle with a strike. Lee does something quite different. Lee shoves his hand elbow deep into the dirt and wrenches up without even a grunt of effort an entire tree root, knocking Zuko off balance as he upends the soil while placing cover between him and the sound ninja. I am positive there is some sort of trick to your attack. Therefore, I will not waste my time trying to dodge it, Lee declares. After all, I have seen your jutsu before. Lee takes advantage of their cover to slow down. Continuing the trend of doing things Sasuke doesn't expect him to, he starts unwinding the bandages on his hands until he has a length of loose linen about a foot long each in each hand. He spares one last glance over his shoulder at Sasuke. This next jutsu places an incredible strain on my body, so please, be ready for the worst. Sasuke's eyes go wide as he snaps, are you serious? We're no good to Sakura if we're both broken. Why are you taking some stupid risk? Lee looks away, because I am only permitted to use this jutsu under one specific circumstance when it is to protect someone precious. I am not surprised you do not understand. Doso comes wheeling around the root and Lee moves so fast Sasuke would need his Sharingan to track him. In a breath he's in front of Doso, foot slamming upward into his chin. Doso goes flying up into the air, almost high enough to hit the first branch of the great trees above. Lee moves in another imperceptible flash and this time appears behind Doso, bandages moving as if possessed to wrap tight around him and bind them together. Lee loops his arms around Dosu and crushes him close as he flips them both around to fall headfirst towards the forest floor. And then, as if none of this was enough, Lee starts to spin. Take this. Primary Lotus. Sasuke notices Zuko finish a round of hand signs and shove his hands into the dirt a second too late. The ground rises to meet them in a burst, sending Lee flying off on a diagonal while Dosu lands heavily up to his waist in the soil. Lee lands on his feet in front of the tree hollow, but wobbles unsteadily as he tries to push himself upright. Sasuke resists every urge to say he told him so. I'll expect a thank you later, Zuko snickers as Dosu extracts himself from the dirt, shaking off the impact. Don't give yourself too much credit, Dosu grouses, slowly turning back to face Lee. That jutsu nearly took me out even with your rescue. He pulls his sleeve back again, but now it's my turn. Doso charges and swipes at Lee's middle, but as Lee dodges the apparatus on his arm pulses and lets out a low tone that for a second makes Sasuke feel like vomiting, while Lee nearly falls on his ass trying just to stop moving. For a second Doso's voice wobbles in Sasuke's ears, you're fast, I'll give you that much. But you're not faster than the speed of sound. Of course. They're sound ninja. Of course they use sound. Lee pitches forward and down to one knee as he fails to regain equilibrium and fails the fight against nausea, retching onto the dirt. A trickle of blood comes running down from one ear along the line of his jaw. Doso's laugh scrapes at Sasuke's already thin restraint. I don't need to hit you with my fists, I can hit you with the power of sound. Old-fashioned taijutsu's not worth much when you're too dizzy to stand, Zuko cuts in, pushing air in threatening jets out of the holes in his hands. Face it, eyebrows, you're up against the jutsu of the future. Doso skirts around Lee, bringing his arm up for another swipe. Your turn now, Uchiha. Sasuke's grip on his kunai is white-knuckled as he pushes himself up on his good leg and braces for Doso's strike, but Lee comes wheeling in between them with a cry of "Leaf Hurricane." He can't even finish through another bout of nausea. Doso lets out another grating laugh and brings his arm around for another strike. One Lee blocks, but Doso's amplifier lets out a high-pitched whine that sends Lee crumpling to the ground, clutching his ear as more blood gushes forth. Sasuke's own shout surprises him. He's already down, leave him alone. Doso's eye slowly slides to Sasuke, and the bandages over his mouth bend with a concealed smirk. Ah, right, I'd forgotten about you. Now his Uchiha pride is burning bright and hot, and Sasuke brings his kunai up to point at him and challenge, I won't let you make that mistake again. This looks really bad, guys, we should get out of here. You're underselling it, Koji. Naruto and Sakura are out, Lee's not far from out himself, and Sasuke's looking. Geez, I didn't know Sasuke could look that bad. So? What do you want to do, Ino? Why are you asking me? Aren't you madly in love with him? I thought you'd want to keep him from getting killed. I mean that is, Oh, right, I forgot. There's absolutely no way Sasuke could lose a fight. Your words, right? You ready to stand by them? What do you want me to do? Jump out there and get myself killed. If Sasuke can't handle them, what the hell makes you think we can? Sasuke grabs a fistful of shuriken in his offhand and lobs them at Dosu as he starts running. Zuko comes sprinting in before Sasuke gets too close, shooting out a blast of air to reverse their trajectory. Sasuke dives into a roll, just barely skirts underneath the tips of the shuriken and the force of the air he comes out close enough to swipe at Zuko's ribs with his kunao but too slow to make contact before Zuko can pivot out of his reach. Sasuke stays low to the ground and lunges again. He bridges 3 inches of distance before a hand grabs the back of his headband at the knot. Fuck, he forgot there were 3 of them. Kin's other hand takes a fistful of his high collar and she physically lifts him off the ground, swinging him around and tossing him like a discus with a great roar of effort. Sasuke smashes face first into the boulder opposite the tree hollow, his nose breaking on impact. As he bounces off and hits the ground, a part of Sasuke's brain absently takes note of how he no longer feels the familiar weight of his headband pressing on his forehead. He rolls to a stop and opens one eye just in time to see Kin twirling his headband by one untied end, strolling up to him with a wicked grin. Sasuke growls like a feral dog and has almost pushed himself up to his good knee when Kin reaches him and stomps on the bad one. He screams and swipes blindly at Kin with the hand he realizes too late is no longer holding a kunao. Her free hand catches his wrist in an ironclad grip. She holds his headband above her head, looking for all the world like the academy upperclassmen that would take Naruto's goggles and make him chase them all over the village to get them back. You want this that bad, Uchiha? Come on, you'll have to work for it. If Sasuke had any chakra left he would be spitting fire as he growls, I'll kill you, I'll fucking kill you. She steps easily over him, rearranging herself so she has a foot on his shoulder and is pulling back on his outstretched arm, tossing his headband into the bushes so she can hold his forearm with both hands. Sure you will, princess. And then she yanks. Sasuke feels his joint pop out of the socket and there's no other way to describe the sound he makes than a wail as it comes surging from his throat, louder and louder for every second Kin keeps pulling, scratching his throat raw as it claws its way out. She tosses him by the forearm back towards Zuko, who stops Sasuke's roll with another stomp to his bad knee. Sasuke's able to take one glance at it and see it's becoming very purple before Zuko stomps again. And, just for good measure, he does it one last time as hard as he can. Sasuke feels something crack then stops feeling anything in his knee at all. His cry makes his own ears ring, and there's no denying the tears that are cutting clean streaks through the dirt on his face. Lee is staring at him, pure horror in his big black eyes. Sasuke finally finds a reason to be glad Sakura and Naruto are unconscious. He's not sure he could live with the shame of them seeing him like this. Zuko grabs Sasuke by the hair and lifts him up so he can grin in his face. Ah, our princess is so pretty when she cries, isn't she? Screw it, he's dying anyway. Sasuke spits in his face. Zuko doesn't miss a beat, his face immediately twisting into a scowl and his free fist coming up to punch Sasuke square in the eye. Sasuke doesn't have room to reel back with Zuko holding his hair so he almost leans into it as Zuko keeps punching him, likely for no other reason than to guarantee his eye will swell shut. Once he's blackened his eye to his satisfaction, Zuko lets go of Sasuke's hair and hits him with a blast of air to the chest just hard enough to send him tumbling into the rudely unearthed. He slides bonelessly down to the dirt, his good arm trapped beneath his side. Screw it, I don't give a shit anymore what the boss wants, Zuko shouts, pointing both palms right at Sasuke, I'm gonna kill this little fucker. All Sasuke can think is, finally. There's no way Sasuke could ever lose. Ino had taken that for granted. He'd seemed completely unbeatable in academy sparring sessions, mopping the floor with the likes of Naruto, Kiba, even her own teammates Shikamaru and Koji without even breaking a sweat or that cool, disinterested look. This was perhaps the rawest way possible for Ino to learn that academy sparring was miles away from a real fight. Shikamaru's eyes are wide and he looks caught between leaping into the fray or away into the forest as he hisses, this is about to get really ugly. Koji is shaking, past the point of stress eating, his appetite gone in the face of Sasuke's blood painting the ground. Somehow, all Ino can do is remember the first time she met Sasuke. They'd been so small, too small for the academy and probably too small for the meeting of the clans they'd been brought to. He'd looked ridiculous in the little kimono and hakama he was wearing, matching his brother and father and yet looking like a tiny version of his mother with much spikier hair instead. Ino's not sure why she judged she probably didn't look much more dignified in her own tiny kimono. Due to alphabetical seating instead of prestige seating, the Yamanaka and the Uchiha were closer together than they would usually be, so Sasuke was able to see her quite easily by just leaning over and looking down the line of clan representatives. He'd smiled, the expression dimpling his little chubby cheeks, and waved at her. Her face had started burning as she waved back. His older brother had gently pushed him back into sitting up straight, nodded at her in a polite but firm suggestion that she do the same, and Ino had left the clan meeting holding her father's hand with a skip in her step because she was sure she was going to marry that sweet boy in the silly little hakama. After a while Sasuke had stopped smiling and Ino had forgotten why she'd started crushing on him in the first place, the feelings dwarfed by her own sense of competition. But right here in this forest Ino's brows furrow and she clenches her hands into fists, because she is sure that she's not going to let that sweet boy in the silly little hakama die. Sasuke's vision blurs and he's convinced that he's finally fallen asleep and started dreaming, because now the three dumbasses from Team 10 are standing between him and the sound genin. All Sasuke can do is blink sluggishly, taking in the whole scene. Nara is holding a Kimika's scarf like a leash, Akamaiki isn't even on his feet, and Yamanaka is standing tall between them, hands curled into white-knuckled fists at her sides. So Sasuke just slurs, "No fucking way." "Yeah, that's about how I'm feeling too," Nara coughs, a wry grin on his face. Yamanaka smiles over her shoulder at him and something stirs weakly at the back of his mind, like a half-remembered dream. "Don't worry, Sasuke. We're not gonna let them get any closer." If Sasuke were in less pain and had any more faith left to spare, he would have remembered his manners and said thank you. As it stands, he just laughs like a drunkard and says, "Good luck." Chapter 3. 3. Darkness. Burning. Pain. She's not sure how long she's been here, writhing in the dark and the hurt and the heat, listening to the two voices scream and whisper and argue and bargain. "Come now, child, won't it be so easy to just slip away?" "Like hell it will be. I'll take your power and use it to punch your teeth in. All you've done is drag those two down, leaving them will be a blessing. You know what sounds like a blessing to me? Coming out of this, being stronger, and tearing everything to shreds. You've done nothing. You are nothing. Do the world a favor and become nothing in the purest way you can. Tough shit, you've made me more than that." The voices fought and snarled and scratched at each other until the familiar and the foreign suddenly started merging into one. They started agreeing. The old, the suppressed, the willful, saw the benefit in a compromise. The new, the sinister, the calculating, saw a use for her. And then it was just one voice, caught between young and old, male and female, brash and reserved, musing out loud to her. "Come on, sweetie, don't you want to wake up? Who knows how those two are getting on without you? They need you. They'd never admit it, but you're what holds them together." The heat starts to die down. The pain starts to fade. The darkness starts to brighten. Because the voice has a point. "Come on, think of it like this: with all this power, you'll be on their level. Hell, you might be better than them. They'll be watching your back now after all of this. Isn't that what you want, sweetie?" Her vision starts to come back to her in blurry slices as her eyes try with all their strength to open. Ino, Shika, Cho, running through their clan's techniques and showing off against these three people in foreign clothes and unfamiliar headbands, but quickly being pushed into a corner since they didn't account for the sheer ruthlessness of their opponents, and she tries to move, but can only wiggle her fingers by inches. "Just say yes, sweetie, you don't have to be nothing anymore. No more clanless child of civilians. You can be a legend with power like this. Power like this saves the world. Power like this gets its face carved in a mountainside. Power like this can demolish mountains. Just say yes, sweetie." She forces her eyes open, one more time, searching for one important thing, and she finds it, leaning battered and broken against a pulled-up root. Nose broken and bloodied. Knee bent wrong, bruising past purple. Arm limp, shoulder jutting out square instead of round. Eyes black, no Sherry Non, no chakra. Sakura's eyes shoot open wide and she lets the heat fill her from toe to crown as she growls, "Yes. Hell yes. Give it to me, now." Sasuke had to admit it. Shikamaru, Ino, and Koji could have gone the distance. They had fairly fine-tuned control over their clan's signature techniques, though they'd yet to make them their own, and as always the Ino-Shikacho combination was built from the ground up to work together like magic when the right strategy was pushing it forward. It was a shame that the right strategy is exactly what they didn't have. They'd leapt in half-cocked with no real idea of how to drive the sound genin back beyond, overwhelm them until they give up, and had made the fatal assumption that they cared what happened to their teammates. Now Shikamaru was at his limit, Koji was reeling from one perfectly timed hit, and Ino was stuck in a body no one was going to protect. Sasuke swallowed hard and looked over to Lee. He was still on the ground, recovering poorly from the primary lotus and the relentless attack on his inner ear. Sasuke still couldn't feel his left leg, and any relief that numbness gave him was replaced with the stabbing pain from his dislocated shoulder, broken nose, and black eye. He was still so low on chakra he was next to useless, and he hadn't heard movement from the tree hollow since this whole fight began. There was nothing left but to hope for death or a miracle. Zuka grins a predatory grin as he crows, "Did you really think you could beat us? Face it, you leaf ninja are just a bunch of hacks." Doso's smirk is evident under his bandages as he adds, "From a second-rate village." Huh, that's pretty tough talk. I guess that makes your village third-rate. Everyone's eyes fly up to the branches, and Sasuke can't believe that they actually got the miracle. Niji Hyuga stands proud and defiant above the fray with the third clanless member of the team crouched at his side, her dark eyes immediately finding Lee and lighting up with concern. His arms are crossed over his chest and he looks down upon the sound ninja like they're little more than a pair of rats in some Hyuga estate storeroom. Niji glares down his nose at them, "I wonder if any of you amateurs are ready to take on the real thing." Since Sasuke is still convinced he might die here, he allows himself a moment to think that Niji is incredibly cool. But since he still has a reputation to uphold in the event he lives, Sasuke just mutters, "About time you got here." Niji's eyes settle on Lee as he lies in the dirt, "And I see one of you decided to work over our teammate." He grits his teeth in a snarl and the veins around his eyes bulge outward as the Byakugan activates. Who wants to admit to that? Now that gets the sound genin to freeze, and Sasuke's not above smirking in a sick sense of triumph. The Hyuga were the Uchiha's only rivals once the Senju all but disappeared. He'd been told and shown in great detail what they could do. Sasuke's going to enjoy seeing Niji dismantle the sound ninja piece by bloody piece. All thought of that disappears from Sasuke's mind as a rush of pressure hits him and hits him hard. The hair on the back of his neck stands up on end, and he isn't alone. Everyone in the clearing suddenly freezes, tensing up, gasping, shivering from head to toe, and all eyes shoot to the tree hollow. Sasuke turns to look with his whole body. For half a second, when all he saw was Sakura standing tall with her eyes wide open, Sasuke could only think it was another miracle. But then he sees the rest. Thousands of tiny black petals have exploded outward from the flower on her shoulder and spread across her body, covering just over half of it. Sakura had never had more than an average amount of chakra to her name, but now it's quite literally overflowing, swirling around her in a sickly green cyclone and sloughing off her in pulses of heat and energy with so much force it cuts lines in the ground. She stands slightly hunched over, arms hanging loose, looking up from a downturned face like an animal about to lunge. But more than any of that, Sasuke can't look away from her eyes. They're open wide enough to hurt, and the one thing he can see in them is a deep and twisting malice, an anger that's festering and rotting and threatening to poison everything it touches. He sees it in the mirror on the worst days. Niji's voice comes in choked horror from the treetops, "What in the world?" Kin's voice carries Ino's shaky, "S Sakura." Shikamaru thinks fast and starts dragging Ino's body to the bushes, shouting, "Get out of there, Ino. Now." Ino doesn't move. She doesn't even look like she heard him. She's just staring ahead, frozen, a look of uncharacteristic fear distorting Kin's features. Sakura's eyes turn to Sasuke, and for a brief flicker there's the worry he's used to from Sakura before the anger covers it up again and she growls, "Tell me who did this, Sasuke." 1,000 different words fight to get out of Sasuke's mouth, shoving and pushing and scratching, and all that ends up escaping is, "Sakura. What in the—" Something like recognition sparks in her eyes, and her mouth pulls from one side up into a bizarre parody of a smile. "Don't worry, Sasuke. I'm stronger now. I can protect you." The Nada smile widens into an angry, primate grin, "So just tell me who the hell it was." Sasuke's throat dries up, and no matter how much he wants to speak, all that comes out are hoarse breaths. One singular thought crawls into his brain, word by agonizing word, this is no miracle. Sasuke's shocked back into the present by Zuko sneering, I'm the one who roughed up your princess, sweetheart. What are you gonna do about it? Sakura's eyes snap to him and her chakra flares up around her, sending another pulse of pressure across the clearing. The black petals flash a magma red as they creep further across her body, covering another inch of her skin, and those bared teeth fall open as she lets out a long, furious breath. Sasuke turns to look at the sound genin. Dosu is slowly backing up, exposed eye wide open in naked fear. Kin, Ino, both are too shocked to move. Enzaku is pure arrogance, readying his hands for a blast of air. Come on Dosu, Zuko laughs like a blood-drunk hyena, don't tell me you've chickened out. Dosu reaches out to Zuko but all he can do is shout, Zuko, no. You don't understand. Zuko shouts over him, watch this. I'll take all three of them out in one shot. Supersonic slicing wave. The rush of sound and wind is deafening, but Sasuke doesn't have time to feel it before Sakura's grabbing his collar in one hand and Naruto's in the other. He feels another pulse of chakra, the very singular feeling of jutsu cast without a hand sign, before Sakura darts at a breakneck speed around the sound genin to the other side of the clearing. Sasuke nearly gets whiplash from the sudden start and stop, and when the sound and fury of Zuko's attack finally dies down, all that remains where Team 7 had stood is a storm of pink petals. Zuko doesn't even have time to whirl around before Sakura's behind him, slamming an elbow into the base of his neck. Sakura's taijutsu and physical strength had always been, quite frankly, terrible, but that blow sends Zuko spinning through the air and into Dosu, knocking them both over. As they pick themselves up, Sakura savors the moment, that horrible not a smile stretching her mouth into a misshapen scar of teeth. Come on, boys, she warbles, you gave everyone else such a thrashing, don't tell me you all lost to this. Zuko takes her bait like clockwork, throwing his hands up again as he roars, come here and say that to my face, you little bitch. Sasuke's vision blurs and Sakura is in Zuko's striking range, careful what you wish for. She swings wide with her right fist, but this one is just slow enough for Zuko to strap around her, avoiding the blow. He fakes around to her left, she turns to follow, and Zuko jukes back to the right with a hand wide open and going right for her head. Sasuke's mind cooks up a horrible image of Sakura's skull being blown clean apart by compressed air, and he starts to call out, but Zuko's already grabbed her long, silky hair and wrapped it tight around his fist. He yanks it back and jeers right in her ear, gotcha. If you spent as much time on your taijutsu as you do on this hair, I wouldn't be about to blow your head off. He mashes his palm against the back of her head and a wave of sound explodes out into Sakura. With a violent shudder, her body bursts into yet more pink petals, but Sasuke notices one other thing: hair. Countless strands of Sakura's long hair fly into the air all around Zuko's hand, and when Sakura materializes behind him, she's holding a kunao in her right hand, her hair chopped messily short just above the nape of her neck. Her headband slides off and clatters to the ground. Before Sasuke can process that, Sakura's hand shoots out and buries itself in Zuko's hair at the crown of his head, pulling back hard so his chin points at the sky and he lets out a strangled screech. She positions the point of her kunao as close to Zuko's pale neck as she can get and hisses, "You talk too much." And she brings the kunao down. Ino lets out an ear-piercing scream in Kin's voice. Zuko tries, but the sound is wet and choked and cuts off completely as Sakura shoves the kunao as deep as it'll go. Blood shoots out in a jet of crimson, and when she lets his head go, Zuko crumples to the ground, landing on his back, staring up at the sky. The blood covers Zuko's neck and dribbles onto the ground. Sakura stands next to him with her back straight, her face calm. Sasuke blinks, and for that second of darkness he's 8 years old again in his parents' bedroom, face to face with Itachi, moonlight streaming in and making the blood look as black as his family's hair. His eyes are wet with tears when he opens them again. Sakura's eyes slowly shift from Zuko to Kin, Ino, now with her hands covering her mouth as she shakes violently. Sakura's mouth pulls into that not a smile once again. 1 down, 2 to go. Things come to Sasuke in shaking flashes as Sakura advances on Kin, on Ino, on them both. Glimpses of her in the academy library as he cut through it, deep in books, because she couldn't rely on raw talent or a clan name to make her more than a chunin that peaks at 12 and does C-rank missions for the rest of her life. Glancing from the corner of his eye at her staring at him when she should have been staring at the board during lectures, spring green eyes searching for the moment he would return her gaze so she could blush and hurriedly look away and smile to herself like she'd won her own private game. How she'd done that even when they were newly minted genin and introducing themselves to their sensei. The view of her in the trees above, having mastered the fine chakra control necessary to get up there easily, kicking her legs back and forth and sticking her tongue out at them because for the first time she'd actually beaten them, and the brief thought of how impressive that was before he squashed it down. The sound of Sakura sobbing as she held him in an embrace that pressed on Haku's needles, the sound deep and forlorn like the wailing howls of a cat that had lost its kittens to a rushing river, a sound of complete, inconsolable anguish. Two thoughts, in quick succession. First, that the sound was beautifully honest. Second, that he never wanted to hear it again. Her moaning with regret as they left the first exam that of course the goal had been to cheat all along. She couldn't believe she'd wasted her time just answering the questions. Sure, they hadn't been that hard, but she couldn't believe she'd been so stupid as to miss the point and wondering how she could possibly think she was stupid. In that moment, Suzuki realizes he knows Sakura far better than he thought. And now he's pushing his shoulder back into place, shoving himself to his feet, scrambling forward on limping legs and throwing himself at her back, tearing his voice out of his throat. Sakura. Suzuki is not graceful. Not perfect. He can't be anymore. His arms wrap around her but his momentum sends them both crashing to the ground, neither able to catch themselves. They twist and land on their sides, both scraping their cheeks on the dirt. Sakura writhes like a fish on a line and wrenches one arm out of his grasp to prop herself up, to glare down at him with eyes wide and teeth bared. Suzuki couldn't know what he looked like when he met her eyes, but Sakura would see the look on his face behind her eyelids for years to come. "Don't do this," he rasps, voice thick, "this isn't you." It's not quite instant. There's a moment that feels like a year where she just stares down at him, eyes wide, body trembling. Then her chakra rushes up around her like a storm, nearly forcing Suzuki off, and the petals race back to their center, leaving her skin clear. She wriggles out of his arms so she can get up onto her knees, eyes darting from one injury to another, pure in their worry. She's Sakura again, fretting and babbling, "I'm so sorry Suzuki, I don't know what in a voice that cracks and crumbles around sobs. It's kind of annoying. But it's annoying in that way Sakura always is, it's common, simple, uncomplicated. It's the kind of annoying that could only come from a girl who'd never had to worry about anything bigger than if her crush liked her back before her journey to the land of waves. So it's the kind of annoying that makes him smile. Doso clears his throat and in an instant Suzuki is back in the forest of death with enemies bearing down on his team. He props himself up and cranes his neck to look around. Sakura Dosu has drawn back to the edge of the clearing, Zuka over one shoulder and an unconscious Kin near his feet. He's holding his scroll out for them all to see. "Clearly we underestimated you, Harano," he rumbles, placing the scroll neatly down on the ground, "a trade the scroll for our lives." Suzuki's mouth screws up into a frown and he's about to shout the 1,000 questions on the back of his tongue, but when he sees Sakura's face they get caught behind his teeth. First, her eyes slide between Suzuki and Doso, as if she still doesn't believe someone's afraid of her strength. Second, her eyes settle on Dosu and they burn. She clenches her jaw and her fingers dig into the dirt and she looks ready to pounce. Third, her eyes slide closed. "Deal," she growls, "get the hell out of here." Doso grabs Kin by the scruff and disappears into the treetops. "We can't tell Naruto about this." Sakura's voice makes Suzuki jump. She'd been quiet since the sound genin disappeared and their classmates came spilling into the clearing, busying themselves with Naruto and Lee. Sakura had just stared at her hands, softly shaking with pursed lips and wide eyes. He'd sat at her side. He wasn't good with words unless they were mocking, and he remembered enough of his manners to say nothing at all if he couldn't say anything nice in moments like this. Now she was fixing him with an intense stare as she continued, "He's already gonna make a huge scene after seeing what we've been through. We don't need to give him any more to worry about. Especially since we don't know what this thing is." Suzuki frowns, a hand drifting towards the mark before he realizes it's moving. "How long can we keep it from him? Something might set it off again and..." She fiercely shakes her head, taking his hand in a vice grip and pressing it to the ground. "We can't let that happen. Not again. I won't." Her voice catches and tears flood her eyes. She blinks hard so they won't fall, but it doesn't quite work. Sakura's voice falls into a whisper. You know what the scariest part was? I wasn't. It wasn't like I was trapped, just watching. I knew what I was doing. I was thinking things like, oh, now I can finally use that genjutsu I read about. I've never had enough chakra to do it myself. I was proud. It was so easy to just let loose. I felt strong and brave and... Suzuki squeezes her hand. There's always a catch to crap like this. You're too smart to fall for something too good to be true. She laughs, but it's a pale shadow of laughter, her eyes still focused on the dirt. For being so smart, I've been feeling pretty stupid lately. Suzuki's at a loss for words once again as Sakura solemnly takes a kunai and makes a shallow cut above her mark, pulling out bandages to wrap over her whole shoulder. The blood seeps in convincingly enough, and she binds it tight so she won't bleed out or get an infection from a ruse. He hadn't known there were multiple ways of feeling helpless, but today was proving to be very educational. Ino's voice breaks through the tension as she strolls over in a stiff-legged attempt at being casual. Hey, forehead. Want me to even up your hair? You're looking pretty scraggly after the job you did on yourself. Sakura's hand ghosts around the ragged edge of her hair, looking almost like she forgot she cut it. Then she slowly shakes her head. No, I'll keep it like this, she mumbles, running a hand through her long bangs. It's better if I remember. Ino pursed her lips, putting her hands on her hips and shifting from foot to foot, obviously trying to find some words to say but not coming up with anything. Sakura saves her by asking, but could you take a look at Suzuki? You're better at field medicine than I am and he really needs it. She smiles at him and gives him a pat on the shoulder she obviously meant to be reassuring. I'll go see how Lee's doing, and... Thanks, Suzuki. For everything. Suzuki watches Sakura leave, but his eyes can't linger on her for long as Ino settles down heavily in front of him, obscuring his whole field of vision as she leans in close and starts prodding at his face. He finds it's a lot easier to remember her name now that he essentially saved her life. Black eye, broken nose, pretty standard. Ino starts her running commentary, dislocated shoulder, also doable, but oh my god Suzuki, what the hell happened to your knee? Suzuki's not sure what she wants to hear exactly, so he just starts from the top. I landed wrong falling from one of the higher branches to the forest floor. It probably twisted. How high up? Huh. Ino glares at him as she feels his knee. How high up did you fall from? Suzuki furrows his brow in thought. 12 meters, give or take. Ino's eyes go wide. Suzuki. At best you tore a ligament. At best. If that sound jackass didn't break it while stomping on it, you for sure broke it falling. Suzuki just stares at her. Oh. Ino runs a hand through her hair as she groans. Okay, so you obviously didn't splint it or wrap it up, and the only classes you got less than 100% in were the medical ninjutsu classes, so I know you didn't use any on yourself. Did you at least keep your weight off it? Suzuki slowly shakes his head. Ino stares at him, jaw on the floor, long enough for him to get uncomfortable. More uncomfortable, anyway. But then she smiles and shakes her head. You're kinda hopeless, huh? It doesn't sound like an insult. Not even an accusation. She almost sounds delighted, like a child let in on a secret. So he shrugs, I guess. Ino returns to his face, to the things she can easily fix by setting his nose and splinting it straight or giving him a disposable ice pack for his black eye and telling him to try his best to do 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off. He likes her scolding him far better than he likes her fawning over him, he decides. She grows quiet as she wraps his arm tight to his side with another disposable ice pack pressed to it, looking past him as she performs the repetitive action. He's about to tell her she's maybe wrapping it too tight when she speaks up again. What happened to Sakura? On instinct Suzuki lies. What do you mean? She scowls at him and tightens the wrap on purpose, enough to make him wince. You know damn well what I mean. She's never been that fast. She's never had that much chakra. She's never been that terrifying. Ino doesn't say the word but they both hear it. Her eyes are hard for a precious moment, but they soften with a heavy sigh. Look. Me and Sakura. We're not exactly friends anymore, but I don't hate her. I've never hated her. It's like you and Naruto. Suzuki narrows his eyes. How is it like that? Ino just arches a brow at him. I guess you're clueless as well as hopeless. A rivalry isn't about hate, it's about pushing each other. You don't push at people you don't care about. If you don't care, you ignore them. I know you know all about that. He frowns because he's not going to let her see him grimace. Suzuki mutters under his breath, I don't know what happened to Sakura. We had a run-in with another ninja and he left that mark on her shoulder, and I guess it lets her do all of that. He'd meant to leave it on me, but she... Ino's smile was wry and small. She took the hit for you, huh? He nods, feeling as clueless and hopeless as she'd determined he was. Ino glances over her shoulder at Sakura before looking back to him. People are going to start asking questions. If it's not my team or Lee's, it'll be your sensei, or the exam proctors, or worse. Are you ready for that? It'll only be a secret until we know what to do next. Suzuki bristles, gritting his teeth. For now, we're just getting through this leg of the exam. It's called the survival portion for a reason. There's nothing to do for it but survive. Ino shrugs, closing her eyes in a tacit gesture of surrender. It's your call, or, I guess, it's hers. You're just her teammate, you're along for the ride. She fixes him with a hard stare as she stands up. I'm not leaving, I'm just going to see if I can find some sturdy sticks for a splint, but... make sure she doesn't do anything stupid before I get a chance to beat the tar out of her. Suzuki smirks, more with his eyes than his mouth. I'll try, but I've got my hands full enough with Naruto. He does enough stupid crap for all of us. Ino rolls her eyes and walks past him over to the bushes to start foraging for splint material, while Suzuki's eyes find Sakura like a magnet pulling to metal. She's found Lee and is speaking to him in a soft voice. His female teammate managed to rouse him, but he's still quite sensitive to loud noises after the damage done to his ear. Speaking of loud noises, Suzuki winces as he hears Naruto bellow, Suzuki, what the hell happened to you? The blur of orange and blue comes skidding in, almost tumbling end over end as he tries to land on his knees at Suzuki's side. His blue eyes search him up and down but keep going back to his knee. Suzuki imagines he'll have to get used to those kinds of looks, at least for a little while. Naruto's been talking the entire time Suzuki's been thinking, and what happened to Sakura's hair? Did you guys beat the snake lady, or is she still out there? And how'd bushy brows get so messed up? How long have I been out? Shikamaru silences Naruto, at least for the moment, by throwing a heavy clod of dirt at the back of his head and snapping, could you shut your mouth for 5 seconds? Everyone here's had more than enough excitement for a lifetime. Try to read the room. Naruto, to his credit, does bring the volume down by a few decibels as he snaps back at Shikamaru. That's another thing, why are you guys even here? They came to help us, Suzuki sighed, leaning back on his free hand. Let's try and run through the rest of your questions in order. I encountered some trouble. You should ask Sakura why she cut her hair, because I don't know. The grass ninja is gone. Lee tried to help us and also got into trouble, and you've been out for 9 hours. Naruto's eyes somehow find a way to go even wider, and they look from Suzuki to Sakura and back again before he asks, was Sakura also out? Suzuki pauses, long enough that he imagines everyone else in the clearing knows he's about to twist the truth just a bit. And he replies, yeah. She got knocked out in the fight with the grass ninja. Naruto grimaces, his thoughts spilling out of his mouth in that uncurated way they always do. No wonder you look like shit, you must have stayed up all night, and his face splits into that sunny grin, you were totally lost without us. Suzuki cuffs Naruto on the side of the head with a snort, don't get smug, I'm not the one who overslept and missed 2 whole fights. Naruto's about to fire back when a voice beside them clears their throat, Suzuki. Suzuki turns and right at his eye level is his headband. He follows the arm holding it up to Niji, staring down at him with a kind of perfect calm Suzuki envies. You should keep better track of this, Niji says as Suzuki hesitantly takes the headband back. Suzuki swallows hard, running his thumb over the leaf insignia. What happened to Lee? I should've. Niji shakes his head, don't apologize. Can you imagine how Lee would be ranting about disgrace and how much he would hate owing you something if you actually did save him? Trust me, he's far better off with Sakura as his hero. Suzuki thinks for a moment. Naruto's eyes might pop out of his head. Sakura saved you guys? Seriously? Niji's intense white eyes alight on Suzuki's, asking a silent question. Which Suzuki answers by shrugging with his good shoulder and simply saying, "You shouldn't underestimate her. She might surprise you." Chapter 4. Kabuto strolls into the tower and hears his master's voice ring out, "So, what's the verdict?" He smirks, "They're an interesting group if I had to guess, they only took so long to pass because of Suzuki's injuries. After all, a ninja can't jump through the trees if his knee is broken." Kabuto winces, "I will admit, I did tell them I knew a little bit about medical ninjutsu so they'd let me take a look. With all the beating it took and the low level of treatment it's received, I think he's going to retain some permanent damage. If you still want his body, that might be an issue." Orochimaru waves it off, "We've dealt with worse." Kabuto nods, "Very well. He was able to compensate well for it. He still had chakra, and you don't need to leap into the fray to use the Sharingan or a fireball. In their last engagement he could have taken their opponents out easily if not for Naruto's overconfidence. Now he's an interesting beast. It seems like his chakra repository grows with every time he taps into the Nine Tails well, which is good for a kid who refuses to give up." Orochimaru's gold eyes meet his, "Tell me about Sakura." Kabuto blinks once, "The girl. She has a name, but yes, the girl." Kabuto blinks twice. "Well, she's covered her whole shoulder in bandages so I don't know how her curse mark is progressing, but the few times she used genjutsu she seemed like she was in pain. It's actually helped her stamina, surprisingly. Honestly, I'm not sure what we're looking for with her. We drew up detailed models for how the curse mark could affect Suzuki, and I'm not sure what we could do for Sakura beyond comparing her with Anko's growth pattern. Well, she's nothing." Orochimaru grins that serpentine grin and hisses, "What she is, Kabuto, is the perfect bait. It has been a trying week, to say the very least. Though Suzuki's injuries have agreed with Sakura and Naruto keeping him on the sidelines and making sure he gets plenty of rest, his pride has not." As the three of them walk through the doors into the tower, Naruto striding forward like he doesn't have a care in the world and Sakura having to limp at his pace due to the curse mark flaring whenever she used more than a thimbleful of chakra, Suzuki just hopes that there are medics in there more qualified than Kabuto. The words potentially permanent damage in Kabuto's painful wince as he resplinted Suzuki's knee echo in his mind and he has to shake his head to get them to leave. He was a genin like them, he said he'd never been properly certified, he had to be wrong. Suzuki needed him to be wrong. Sakura sees the deep line forming between his brows and puts a hand on his shoulder. He lets her keep it there as Naruto squalls about the empty room they've walked out into. Sakura rolls her eyes at all of Naruto's ruckus. "Bring it down a notch, Naruto. It's obvious what comes next, just look up there." She points to the framed writing at the head of the room, "Mounted far above their reach if qualities of heaven are your desire, acquire wisdom to take your mind higher. If earthly qualities are what you lack, train your body and prepare to attack. When heaven and earth are open together, the perilous path will become righteous forever. This is the secret way that guides us from this place together." Suzuki smirks up at the poem, "I think I know where we can find that missing word." Naruto turns to him wide-eyed and grouses, "Are you sure? Remember what could have happened last time we tried to open the scroll." Suzuki glares over at him with gritted teeth, "First, I thought I said we weren't going to mention that ever again. Second, if there's anywhere we're supposed to open these scrolls, it's in here." Sakura nods and adds, "We got both of them and made it here fair and square. We've earned the right to open them. But one of us should probably stand back. Just in case." Suzuki swipes the heaven scroll before Sakura can tell him not to move his bad arm too much. Besides, all he has to do for this is hold one end of the scroll. Naruto palms the earth scroll and tentatively makes ready to open it. He locks eyes with Suzuki, "We'll do it together, on 3. Suzuki nods to Sakura, "Count us down." She steps back with a grimace, counting for every step, 1, 2, 3. Suzuki and Naruto tear the scrolls open so fast that Suzuki tweaks his shoulder just a bit, both of them looking away on reflex before slowly turning to read them. On the inside is just the character for person. Sakura from her distance cocks her head to the side, "What does that mean?" Naruto shrugs like he always does, with the entire upper half of his body, "You've got me." For a moment, Sasuke also stares at the scroll, mind completely blank. But then his eyes move from the central character to all the writing around it, set in a very particular pattern. And his eyes go wide. Sasuke flings the scroll across the room as the center point begins to swell and smoke starts to leak out, shouting louder than he probably needed to, "Get rid of the scroll, Naruto." Naruto was already throwing it before Sasuke told him to, chucking it against the far wall with a yelp of panic. Miraculously they both land in a perfect cross with the two main symbols overlapping before the bulges explode into a cloud of light gray smoke that fills the room. Sasuke's an Uchiha, he's been breathing in smoke since before the academy, but Sakura and Naruto are hacking up a lung after a couple breaths. Sasuke's Sharingan whirls to life and he gets into as best a fighting stance as he can manage. He's almost glad Naruto and Sakura aren't on their guard. He's been spoiling for a fight. So you can imagine the mixture of complicated emotions that come bubbling up when the smoke clears and his academy teacher Iruka is smiling affably at them. The smile nearly falls as his warm brown eyes actually take in Team 7, but he manages to keep it around a strained voice as he says, "Long time no see, you three look bad." Naruto lets out a surprised huff of a laugh, "I mean, we feel bad." Sasuke hears feeling the worst. That earns Naruto a slap to the back of the head and a shout from Sakura to watch his mouth. Sakura shakes her head and brings her eyes back to the matter at hand. "What are you doing here, Iruka-sensei? Why'd the scrolls summon you?" Iruka's voice is hurried as he drifts over to the team and starts fretting over their injuries. So, once again, Sasuke gets crowded. "The Chunin are supposed to welcome the passing gen into the tower and I was randomly selected, and how did all of this happen?" Sakura is already explaining, or at least reciting the script they'd rehearsed that included no references to Orochimaru at all. Fretting in harmony with Iruka, Sasuke took a hard landing on his leg, so that's the part that's worst off, though his shoulder is. Sasuke pushes out of Iruka's range with an annoyed grunt of, "I'm fine. I'm a ninja and ninja get wounded. It's called the Forest of Death for a reason, right? We're here and we passed, didn't we? So stop crowding me and say your piece." There's a long, deathly silent moment of his teammates and his teacher just staring at him, eyes wide. Sakura's especially bite into him, not because they're sharp and angry, like Naruto's are for Sasuke shouting at his beloved teacher and crush, but because they're just as soft and concerned as they always are. So he runs a hand through his hair and huffs, "Sorry, it's been a rough week." Iruka's smile has some of that old warmth Sasuke remembers from when he'd reach out and Sasuke would push his hand away. The other academy teachers left the brilliant but broken little boy alone, but Iruka had always tried. Sasuke somehow feels worse. Iruka fishes a watch out of his pocket. "Well, thankfully that week's ended on a good note. You all just barely passed." He takes them through the poem on the wall, how it's meant to represent the duties and diligence of a Chunin, and how the survival exam was meant as a mock mission simulating a long and dangerous journey in the field where danger came at them from all fronts and they had sensitive material they couldn't look at. Sasuke can see Sakura smirking just a little bit as Iruka lays it all out, a surefire sign that she'd guessed this from moment one and was delighted to be proved right. Once again, annoying. But it makes him smile and rhyme with hers. When he finishes going through his script of things he's bound by tradition to tell them, Iruka's smile wavers at the edges and he brings a hand to his mouth. "You three. Please be careful in the third exam. Especially you, Sasuke, your injuries." Naruto, as always, barges right in. "Iruka-sensei, we stopped being students when we got these headbands. And it's like Sasuke said, we're ninja now, ninja get hurt and they survive. We're not kids anymore, so don't you worry, we passed the second exam and we're gonna pass the third. Just you watch." It's everything Sasuke can do to keep his smile down to a small, understated, restrained smirk. Iruka is quiet for a long time before he beams at his students. "You're right, Naruto, I'm sorry about that." Naruto just lets out his goofy cackle of a laugh. Despite Naruto's speech, Iruka still recommends Sasuke see the tower's medical staff before meeting up with the other genin. He makes the very salient point that sure, ninja get hurt and survive, but they also go straight to the hospital if they come back from a mission limping. To Sakura's brief surprise, Sasuke agrees. But then she remembers Kabuto offering to take a look, prodding at Sasuke's knee with chakra-coated fingers, prodding hard and getting no reaction, and grimacing as he said there might be permanent damage. Sasuke wants a second opinion. There's no way he could want anything else. All the candidates filter out into a massive arena with catwalks for viewing up above and a massive sculpture of two hands forming the ram sign at the head of the room. All the Chunin who greeted the teams and their Jonin teachers stand in orderly rows by the sculpture, alongside the exam proctors and the third Hokage himself. Kakashi catches Sakura's eye and gives her a lazy two-fingered salute. After 5 days without him, Sakura finds herself smiling wide and giving him a little wave in return. Naruto, of course, waves with his whole arm and calls, "Hey Kakashi-sensei," so loud it echoes throughout the whole cavernous room. As the Genin line up, Sakura looks around. Only 6 teams out of 26 managed to pass, which was still more than she'd estimated back when they all walked through that chain-link fence. She looks them all over, taking careful inventory. There are the big coats of Team 8, the lackadaisical attitude of Team 10, the clean silhouettes of Team Guy, the plain black of Kabuto's team, and the menacing presence of the Sand Genin. Sakura furrows her brow. She was sure the Sound team that ambushed them would pass. If they were good enough to put Sasuke through all that pain and suffering, they had to be good enough to bounce back from what she did and make it to the tower. A thought passes through her head as her eyes ghost over the empty spot where Sasuke should be. Not really a thought, actually, but a memory. Anko's voice telling them that they would only pass if a full team made it to the center of the forest. Sakura's heart drops into her shoes. Oh no. No 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 no. She clutches her stomach. She's sure her face is turning the same color as her eyes, and Sakura goes very cold as she tries so hard to rationalize. He's just too injured to fight and they've disqualified him. He dropped out after what happened. He disappeared when Dosu and Kin weren't looking. He was an enemy and this is your job, Sakura. This is what ninja do. Now pull yourself together and don't throw up all over the damn floor. Sakura? Are you alright? Hinata's gentle voice sounds like a firecracker going off in Sakura's ear as she whirls around to face her, eyes wide in panic. Poor Hinata nearly bumps into one of the other genin as she jumps at the shock. But quickly she softens and leans in, whispering, "Did something happen?" Out in the forest. Sakura quickly shakes her head and plasters on a smile. No, no, no no no. I'm alright. We're all alright. Naruto's alright. Hinata's cheeks light up, but she has the presence of mind to ignore Sakura's poke at her crush, instead looking at the hole in the ranks between her and Naruto. Where's Sasuke? Did he have to drop out, or? Sakura lets out a short bewildered laugh. What? No, he'd never drop out. He's just checking in with the medics. You know how it is, you do most of the fighting, you get most of the injuries. He'll be here soon. Hinata purses her lips, pushing her fingers together like she always does when she's nervous. I hope so. I think the proctor's about to. Anko's voice, amplified by a microphone headset, cuts Hinata off. Now that we're all here, let me first congratulate all of you on passing. Lord Hokage's going to explain the third exam, so don't let me catch you chatting instead of listening. The Hokage steps forward and launches into one of his infamously long speeches, first explaining the Chunin exam's purpose as a proxy battle for allied countries so they wouldn't destroy each other's military power on a whim, as well as to show the pride and prestige of the nation so those in the position to hire ninja could get a look at what country they'd want to pull from in the future. Nothing new to Sakura. Unlike Naruto, who was stage muttering questions to Lee, she'd paid attention in history. Gaara's voice slithers out in a rasp. Any test at any stake is fine. I can handle whatever you throw at me, so just get to the point. Sakura frowns, looking over at his back. His shoulders are tense and his arms are crossed as tightly as he can manage. He's not like Sasuke or Neji, quiet thanks to confidence. He's a tightly wound spring threatening to burst loose at any second. She sincerely hopes she's nowhere nearby when he does. The Hokage glares pointedly at Gaara, but clears his throat. Very well then, One of the Jonin, a sickly-looking man with deep bags under his eyes, bows his head as he interrupts the Hokage. My lord, before that, please allow me to speak first as proctor of the third exam. The Hokage simply nods. Go ahead, Hey. Hey turns to the assembled genin. Before we begin, he cuts himself off by coughing up a storm into his hand. Sakura grimaces and hopes that they caught him on a bad day. If not, she had no idea how someone so sickly could make Jonin. When he finally finishes, he continues as if nothing happened. Due to more of you passing than we expected, We're going to have to hold a preliminary round before the third exam to thin out the ranks. The genin erupt into rumbles of discontent and outright shouts of no way, and that's not fair, and Sakura isn't ashamed to admit she's part of them. They all passed, and she can at least be sure her team got their scrolls, somewhat fairly. They all deserved to be continue onward, even if it made things take a bit longer. Hey, to his credit, fields their complaints well, projecting his voice so he's speaking just over them. I understand how you're feeling, but like Lord Hokage said, a lot of important dignitaries will be coming in to watch the exams and we can't waste their time. They're here for the best of the best. Besides, we only have a limited amount of time for these exams, so we have to speed things up. So if any of you aren't feeling like you're in top physical condition, now's the time to drop out. Appropriately enough, Hate starts coughing again, and keeps going for a good minute before calming down. We'll be starting the exams immediately. The rumble of the genin protesting the decision goes quiet in her ears as Sakura's eyes go wide and Naruto immediately whirls around to meet her gaze. For once he remembers how to be quiet, mouthing "Where's Sasuke?" She can only shrug. If he still wasn't back, that was going to be a problem. He can't have dropped out, even she knew his pride was all-consuming. Had the medics forced him to stay behind? Oh, that would not go over well. Even in his injured state, Sakura's not sure anyone could force Sasuke to do anything. Hate, ever so helpfully, adds, "Oh yeah, who goes forward is gonna be determined through one-on-one sudden death rounds of combat. So if that's not your speed, now's the time to hop off." Sakura's heart drops into her stomach. Well, if that's what they're doing now, she's hoping to heaven that Sasuke does have the common sense to drop out. She grits her teeth as she feels a sharp, stabbing pain in her shoulder right where the mark is and digs her nails into her palms. Clutching at it over and over again will just get people wondering. She's been getting better at it, keeping her reaction to a minimum even though the pain makes her want to cry. Her taijutsu's still pretty poor, but if she uses any chakra the mark could start spreading again. She can't drop out, because then Team 7 will be down to one representative. She frowns and stares boldly forward. There's no going back now. She can feel eyes on her, from the Jonin to Ino just a couple steps away. In fact, she's been staring at her since they got here, her blue eyes burning holes in Sakura's bandages. Ino's footsteps echo loud in Sakura's ears as she crosses the distance between them. "Hey, Sakura," she whispers, low and harsh, "you sure you should still be here?" Sakura blinks once, twice, then finds the wherewithal to pull up a grin. "Afraid you'll lose if we have to fight, pig." Ino's eyes narrow and she jabs an accusing finger at her shoulder. "You know what I'm talking about. What happens to you if you lose it like you did in the forest? What happens to your opponent?" Sakura feels like her soul is floating above her body, watching this all happen, and all she can do is stammer, "Why, you don't know what you're talking about, Ino." "The hell I don't," she snaps, getting in Sakura's face. "I saw the whole thing. Me, Shikamaru, Koji, and Lee's whole team too. We didn't ask questions because you'd been through enough and we needed to find scrolls. The Jonin aren't gonna cut you that slack." She puts her hand ever so slightly up, hovering around her shoulder threateningly. "Either you own up and withdraw, or I tell them." Sakura is holding her breath, eyes wide, face pale. She glances around Naruto, staring at them with a thoughtful frown as he tries to put the pieces together. Kakashi on the podium studying her with his one eye narrowed, Anko conversing in harsh whispers with Ibiki and the Hokage while her eyes keep darting back to Sakura, looks of concern from Hinata and Iruka, too many eyes all focused on her. And that voice is back, hers but not, whispering, "You make her put that hand down, sweetie, and why not break her wrist while you're at it? You're strong enough. She's still weak. Show her her place." Kabuto raises his hand and all eyes go to him as he, so affably it's almost annoying, says, "Yeah, you got me. I'm out." Naruto's jaw immediately falls to the floor and he starts shouting to Kabuto about not giving up, bringing all eyes and ears away from Sakura, even Ino's, for a precious moment. So Sakura has time to close her eyes, take a deep breath in, hold it, and push it back out. Her mind is clear, just for that moment. And when she opens her eyes, she says, "Ino." The force in Sakura's voice shocks Ino back into paying attention to her while Naruto carries on with Kabuto, keeping everyone else's eyes away from them. Sakura squares her shoulders and meets Ino's gaze. I made a choice back in the forest. I'm not going to let Naruto and Sasuke keep running ahead of me anymore. And I'm not going to let this mark make me lose sight of who I am ever again. I can and I will do both. This is my life and my fate, not yours. So drop it. Ino stares at her a while longer, hand still poised to rise, eyes boring into her with a mixture of anger, pride, and something that looks almost like fear. But she finally scowls and clenches her hand into a fist, cuffing Sakura just a bit too hard on her bandaged shoulder. If you don't keep your shit together, I promise I'll make you regret it, Ino hisses before stalking back to stand in line with her team, ignoring all concerned murmurs from Shikamaru and Koji in favor of glaring hard at the ceiling. A cough from Hate brings Sakura back into the moment, where Kabuto has left the room and Naruto's back to looking at her in confusion, and Hate is asking if anyone else wants to quit. No one responds. Sakura glances over her shoulder at the door. At this rate they might just disqualify Sasuke for not showing up. Hate folds his arms behind his back. Alright, we'll begin the preliminary round. Once again, this isn't sparring, you'll be fighting at full strength. Due to the odd number, we'll have to have 8 normal matches and one of you will be selected at random to fight a second time against the one remaining candidate. Anticipating the groaning he's about to hear, Hate adds, that, I'll grant you, is not fair, but it's the best we can do on short notice. There are no rules. You'll fight until one of you dies, concedes, or physically can't keep going anymore. As Proctor, I have the authority to intervene if a match seems hopeless, so you don't all die here. Now, it's time to determine the first matchup. Anko mutters something into her headset, and right on cue one of the large panels on the far wall slides up to reveal a large screen. Sakura can't help her jaw dropping open. The biggest televisions she's seen around the village were at best 16 inches, that had to be as long as 2 of her, maybe longer. And there are 3 more of them on either side of an even larger panel, taking up a third of the wall. The part of her that's just a 12-year-old girl, no more or less, briefly wonders what it would be like to watch a movie on that. The matchups will be determined at random, and their names displayed on the screens up above, Hate explained. That's all there is to explain, let's begin. Sakura feels her guts twist into knots, then untie themselves again as a bright yellow VS flashes to life in the middle of the screen, and above and below like displays on a slot machine the screen cycles through all the names on the roster. It truly is random. She could be the first match, and she could go up against Gaara or Neji or even Naruto. Her hand drifts to her mark on instinct. Keeping her shit together would be quite a bit harder against any of them. The names finally start to slow their rotation, as if they're programmed with suspense in mind, before stopping on 2 of them that make Sakura's stomach do a somersault. Sasuke Uchiha vs. Yoroi Akada. Sakura covers her mouth and stares at the very empty spot in front of her, whispering, "Oh shit." Naruto slaps both hands over his face and groans, "That dumbass." Hate, like nothing in the world is wrong, calls, "Those whose names have been selected, step forward." Yoroi very smugly does. Sasuke quite obviously does not. Hate's eyes narrow as he surveys the genin. Is Sasuke here? Iruka speaks up so Sakura and Naruto don't have to. I recommended he see the tower medics before coming here, if he hasn't made it by now. But we haven't heard from the infirmary, Kakashi points out, folding his arms over his chest. We don't know if he's medically cleared or not. We're running on a tight schedule, Hate sighs. If he doesn't show up in the next 5 minutes, we'll have to disqualify. The door at the back of the room slams open. I'm here. Sakura whirls around, and for the 3 seconds that she's turning she is absolutely elated. But then she sees Sasuke. The only thing keeping him from doubling over as he pants is his hand on the door frame, while the other one braces against his left thigh. His splint is gone, but his knee still looks like it's covered in one big, yellow-black bruise, and as he walks further into the room she can tell he's trying very hard not to limp. His arm is unwrapped, but he's taking great care not to move it as he walks. Sasuke shoves his way through the crowd to stand beside Yoroi, jaw clenched so tightly Sakura knows for a fact he's biting his tongue to keep from wincing in pain. She sees Kakashi drag his hand down his face and she almost wants to do the same. Hate slowly blinks as he looks Sasuke up and down, and you're sure you're in fighting shape? I was cleared to fight, Sasuke snarls. The only problem is how this tower's laid out. It took me forever to find my way back. That was such an obvious lie it physically hurt Sakura to hear it. It swallows so hard it makes him cough again. Okay. The two of you have been chosen for the first match. Are there any objections? Yoroi is definitely smirking under the bandana covering his face as he says, oh absolutely not. No, Sasuke snaps, let's get on with it. Sakura looks between Kakashi and Naruto and both of them look just as bewildered as her. Ino and Lee's teams are also looking at him in complete bafflement. It seemed she wasn't the only one who never thought Sasuke could be this arrogant. Or, maybe that isn't all. There's a wild look in his eyes, almost hungry, and he's shifting from foot to foot not from pain but anticipation. His fingers are twitching, his eyes are darting around, he can't sit still. Almost like Naruto. He's looking at Yoroi like he has something to prove. Alright then, Hayate says, taking a big step back, let's start the first match. Everyone else, please clear the area and go to the upper level. Sakura catches him by the shoulder just before she heads up to the catwalk, whispering, what happened? Sasuke meets her eyes and his Sharingan are blazing as he growls, they told me I was in no shape to compete. They were going to disqualify me, because I'd just lose immediately if I tried to fight. I'm gonna show them that I don't lose. Sasuke loses. He loses very well, it's a magnificent showing of ninjutsu since Sasuke can't really do much else in his current state. Phoenix flowers, dragon flames, even the signature Uchiha fireball all light up the room and threaten to burn off the spectator's hair. He also uses some genjutsu, though that's mostly to cover his ass in those rare times he has no choice but to change his position and just tell his screaming leg to suck it up. Once he learns Yoroi can drain his chakra, Sasuke starts having to do that a little more often. But it doesn't take his opponent very long at all to pinpoint Sasuke's bad arm and bad leg, close the distance, and work them until his screams start sounding like an animal being slaughtered and the proctor calls the match off. It's slightly less humiliating than Kakashi having to come down and physically stop Yoroi from killing him, but only slightly. Kakashi does appear beside him when the medics are called down to bring him to the infirmary, but that's just to whisper harshly, you're beaten, Sasuke. You were beaten the second you decided to fight on one leg and one arm. Don't take it out on them. And Sasuke is sufficiently shamed into cooperating. Besides, he can already hear one of the medical ninja hurriedly whispering to the proctor that Sasuke was not cleared and he absolutely should not have been fighting at all, and that's just another nail in his coffin at this point. The medics won't let him walk, mostly because he can't, and Sasuke has to quickly do the mental math of what at this point is worse, being stretchered out, or having to lean on Kakashi as he tries to keep one last shred of his dignity by staying upright on his way out of here. He opts for the stretcher. Just about the only positive thing Sasuke can think as he's carted back to the infirmary he'd spent so much concentrated effort wheedling his way out of is that at least it was on the record that he lost instead of being disqualified. Or at least it would be until it was retroactively marked that he was not cleared for competition and was disqualified on those grounds instead. Sasuke shuts his eyes tight, half so he won't have to see Kakashi following them at a leisurely pace and half to be alone with his thoughts. It couldn't even be Neji, or Gaara, or even Naruto, could it? In keeping with Sasuke's luck it had to be some no-name, someone who no one's hopes were riding on, with no clan to speak of. Sasuke hadn't even been in this to become Chunin, he'd been here to test his strength, to see how far he could go, to see what he was worth. He supposes this answers that question. And he bites his tongue hard enough to taste blood. Sasuke doesn't open his eyes until he's being gently dumped out into a cot in the infirmary and the attending medical ninja, a severe Hyuga woman in her 50s with a long scar down the left side of her face, is settling down and going through the signs for the mystical palm jutsu. Any particular reason you didn't use that on him when he first came in? Kakashi wonders, leaning against the wall. She glares at him and shoots back, you should know that heaven knows I fixed you up enough times when you were too young for a full course. Kakashi smiles under his mask, consider this a teaching moment for his benefit, Hakume-sensei. Hakume shakes her head, clicking her tongue, honestly the little dumbass could probably use it. So she meets Sasuke's eyes out of the corner of hers as she continues, kids your age unless there's a life-threatening emergency we do it in multiple treatments. Mystical palm jutsu's overwhelming for a body unaccustomed to it, especially one that's still growing. Best case, one of your injuries heals wrong and you're stuck with something we'd need to do surgery to fix. Worst case, we overload your circulation and you die. When she stops on his knee she leaves it feeling pleasantly numb, moving next to his shoulder and his face. Also, it's fucking hard, so not everyone can learn it. I'll bet even your Sherry Non could only get it halfway right. I'm only one in the tower who knows it, and because they assumed you'd stay put the residents down here didn't call me. The second the soft green glow on her palms goes out she thwops Sasuke on the forehead with the back of her hand thankfully, not the one with a wedding ring on it, and reprimands, we could have made sure there wasn't any permanent damage if you'd just stayed here and let us start working. Now, she sighs, closing her eyes and running a hand through her hair as the wind finally goes out of her sails, we'll see what the hospital can do for you. I don't think you're quite at the level where you have to start looking for another career, but that leg probably won't ever work the same. Sasuke feels as though he's trying to talk around a lump in his throat the size of his fist, so all he says is, "Oh." Kakashi speaks up again, do you think you could get him well enough to watch the other preliminary matches? Hakume scratches the back of her head as she thinks, then shrugs, I can get him in a proper sling and a splint and give him a crutch, he can get up there fine. She shoots Sasuke another glare, this one with a bit less fire, just make sure you don't stand up the whole time. If I hear you didn't sit down even once I'm gonna make damn sure you get the meanest physical therapist the hospital has on staff, you hear me? Sasuke just nods dumbly. Hakume excuses herself to find those supplies, leaving the two of them alone in a silence that feels like it lasts a lifetime. So, Kakashi remarks, settling down casually next to Sasuke and opening up his book, want to tell me what happened in the forest? Sasuke's eyes narrow, and once again he lies on instinct, nothing. That's a lie, Kakashi says in a sing-song voice, turning another page of Ika. I can tell that on top of being dislocated you've got a chip on that shoulder. Something happened. Something that didn't just hurt your body, it hurt your pride. And how the hell would you know? Sasuke snarls, turning as much of his body as he can still move as away from Kakashi as he can get it. Sasuke hears the book snap shut, and Kakashi's voice pitches down in that way Sasuke's heart both reaches desperately out to and violently rejects all at once. How do I ever know anything about you, Sasuke? Because I was a prideful little jerk who never felt good enough but hated it when other people were better than me when I was 12 years old. Kakashi reaches out and puts his hand on Sasuke's shoulder. Sasuke reflexively flinches out of his reach, and his teacher just sighs. I know exactly what it looks like when you've been beaten down, Kakashi continues, voice softer now, when the world seems like it's hell-bent on proving to you that you're not strong enough and never will be, and just will not let up until it's pushed you over the edge. I've been there, over and over again. And I've come really, really close to going over that edge. I want to make sure you never get that close. So tell me what happened to you. And to Sakura. Sasuke shoves himself into sitting up, eyes wide as he frantically asks, how do you? You never let her touch you before, Kakashi answers simply. Sasuke doubts that's the whole answer, but it's the most damning piece of evidence. Sasuke remembers his own words, distantly, as if from the bottom of a deep lake, it'll only be a secret until we know what to do next. He has no idea what to do next. But Kakashi might. Sasuke hangs his head as he begins, we were ambushed by ninja from the hidden grass. Chapter 5. V. Sakura, in all honesty, did not expect Sasuke to come back from the infirmary. But just after Kankuro finishes his fight against Misumi, Sasuke comes hobbling up the stairs on a crutch with Kakashi strategically walking just a couple steps behind him in case he falls. Naruto is sprinting over to meet them before Sakura can weigh the pros and cons of running over there herself, so she's right on his heels, apologizing to everyone they bump into along the way. When Sakura meets them in the middle and smiles at Sasuke, she's at first not surprised that he doesn't return it. But the way moving his eyes to meet hers seems like it takes all the strength in his body doesn't bode well. So? How'd it go? Naruto asks, grinning, and folding his arms behind his head like nothing in the world is wrong. Kakashi glances pointedly down at Sasuke, who closes his eyes with a deep sigh. That gets Naruto's grin to fall. It's not great, Sasuke replies, plucking the words out one at a time with care, I'll mostly recover. But it'll take some time. Naruto winces, yeesh, what did they really tell you? You look like your cat died. Sakura glares at Naruto and is scolding before she can stop herself. Don't pry, Naruto, if he doesn't want to talk that's up to. Sasuke, to her shock, interrupts her, they didn't tell me I was gonna have to stop being a ninja or anything like that. Just that. I might have some trouble with my leg. Probably permanent trouble. Like I said, it's not great. In a flash Naruto is suddenly twice as concerned as Sakura. Then what the hell are we doing standing up? Come on, there's a railing we can see through, sit your ass down. Sakura didn't know there was a way to carefully shove someone, but once again Naruto surprises her by doing just that to Sasuke, pushing him down into sitting with his legs dangling over the edge of the catwalk. Sasuke doesn't object to the shoving, just to that he's so close to the edge. You saw how big my fireballs can get, I don't want someone burning my legs off, dumbass. And Naruto pushes him back to the wall before settling down next to him and stretching out his legs so no one will miss Sasuke's splinted knee and step on it on accident. Sakura can't help smiling. It's clumsy and not at all subtle, but the way Naruto cares about people really isn't anything but charming. Kakashi clears his throat, stepping over Naruto and Sasuke's legs to stand at Sakura's side. There's something we need to talk about. Probably just for emphasis, he lightly taps the bandages on her shoulder. Sakura reaches out and grips the railing so she won't betray anything on her face, knuckles already turning white as she brings her voice down. Oh. Okay. So, you know about that. He nods, putting his hands in his pockets as he begins. I'll be frank with you, that mark can still kill you if you lose control of it. Ordinarily I'd recommend you rely on taijutsu for the preliminaries so your chakra use doesn't aggravate it, but given your strengths don't lie there I don't think that's the best idea. So long as your match isn't up next, I do have an idea. Hey, coughs quite loudly, a surefire sign that he's about to speak. Alright, now that the arena's clear again it's time for the next match. Same as before, the screen lights up, the names start cycling, the names roll to a stop. Sakura Harano vs. Ino Yamanaka. Sakura turns back to Kakashi, who's still staring at the screen, his one exposed eye wider than she's ever seen it. Are you alright, sensei? She asks. I'm terrified, actually, he replies, his voice sounding like it's coming from miles away. Sakura swallows hard. Yeah, me too. Kakashi levels her with an intense gaze. Sakura, if you lose control of the curse mark I will have to come in and stop the fight. It's up to you not to let it get to that point, understand? Sakura nods, her head feeling 1,000 pounds heavier. She carefully makes her way down the catwalk to the stairs and nearly doesn't notice Ino falling in step behind her. This is my life and my fate, so stay out of it, Ino mutters, her voice a mocking imitation of Sakura's. Well, now it is my life on the line, Forehead. I am done cutting you slack. Sakura's jaw clenches and she ignores the stabbing pain in her shoulder. I've had enough of your slack to last a lifetime, pig. Ino makes a choice the second her name flashes up on the display. She's going to end this fight as quickly as possible. This isn't about a clueless boy who decides to fight on a broken knee or becoming the fastest a Yamanaka has made Chunin in peacetime, it's pure survival. She drafts a strategy as she walks down the stairs and really wishes she had time to run it by Shikamaru. The end goal is to mind transfer herself into Sakura as quickly as possible and force her to surrender. Yamanaka Chunin bragged about that tactic all the time from their exam days. It counted mostly just on the basis of it being damn hard to get your opponent still enough to land the jutsu and the proctor respecting that. Hey, it seems like a soft touch, he'll definitely go for it. But if she can possess Sakura without anyone finding out, that'll be even better. She stops near the proctor and turns to Sakura. That dumb round face and giant forehead, Sakura hardly looks any different than she did when they were academy students learning flower arrangement. If Ino squints she can replace that headband with the ribbon she gave her and it's like they're 8 years old again. Her resolve starts to peter out. Oh, heaven knows she can't do this. Sakura is just Sakura, this can't. Ino almost misses Sakura untying her headband. Thanks to her long bangs there's a bit of drama in them falling forward, shadowing her eyes. Then she ties it around her forehead and looks back up to meet Ino's gaze, eyes hard as diamonds. She can hear Sakura's teammates loudly and not so loudly wondering why in the world she did that, but Ino knows. She remembers everything about that moment, from the chill of the wind to the smell of the flowers in that meadow behind the academy and most importantly Sakura's words. I won't wear this headband on my forehead until I can call myself a true shinobi. Ino grits her teeth. Alright then, no pulled punches. Hate's voice rings out through the arena, begin. Everyone has a plan when they first start a fight. Ino realizes this doesn't count for shit the second Sakura sprints forward, socks her in the stomach, and slams her clasped hands down hard on the back of her neck. Ino recovers quick, turning her downward momentum to her advantage by diving to grab Sakura's leg, pulling it out from under her and knocking her to the ground. She keeps a hold on it as she pivots up to her feet, wrenching it the wrong way to twist Sakura's knee. Sakura bites down hard on the inside of her cheek to keep from screaming and instead grabs for her pack of tools, tossing shuriken, senbon and kunao every which way but loose. For half a second Ino thinks she's getting desperate until Sakura's free foot smashes into Ino's chest and the shock makes her let go. Ino reels out of range and Sakura is quick to start moving, skittering around low to the ground like a bug as she quickly locates her shuriken, scoops them up and tosses them at Ino again. She's able to dodge them but Ino knows that hitting her's just a bonus, making sure she can't regain her balance is the grand plan. Something sparks in Ino's mind, she can use that. Ino makes sure to stagger just out of Sakura's reach, timing her dodges and forming one hand sign per step. They're random signs, but not too random. Sakura's enough of a bookworm, she'll know Ino's bullshitting if it doesn't look real enough. Just as she's making the ram sign she sees the perfect opening, and stops moving long enough for Sakura to get close. Sakura finally closes the distance and hits Ino with a palm thrust to the sternum, knocking her down to her knees. Just as Ino predicted, Sakura looms over her with her hands clasped again, poising them to strike right down on the top of Ino's head. Ino throws up the mind transfer jutsu's hand sign, lining it up so Sakura's face is right in the frame and lets it loose. The last thing she sees before the brief blackout of the transfer is Sakura's eyes going wide. When Ino's vision comes back, she is not staring down at the crown of her own head, her hands poised above her ready for a surrender. She is instead looking down at the arena from where Shikamaru is standing. Ino immediately swears out loud, drawing a jump from Koji Inazuma, as she tries to figure out what happened at a lightning pace. She looks back to her match and it doesn't take much effort to figure out Sakura is running around behind Ino's body while a static, illusory version of Sakura stands right where Ino had last seen her. From where she is, perfectly aligned with Sakura, she can see her hands aren't clasped for a blow, they're forming a hand sign, the last one for the dancing petal illusion jutsu Sakura used back in the forest. The forest. Ino immediately laces Shikamaru's fingers to release the jutsu. Sakura just used chakra. Chakra. If she doesn't get back to her body right now. For a few seconds, everything is black. When she comes back to her body, her first instinct is to lunge forward, run, leap out of Sakura's range, but just as the illusion explodes into petals, Ino is yanked backwards by Sakura, wrapping part of Ino's ponytail around her hand. Oh no 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 no, this is how that Zuko kid died, no 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 not again. Ino lets out a terrified shriek as she palms a kunao in her shaking hand and drags it through her ponytail. She tears out of Sakura's grasp at a full sprint, leaving her hair behind. She takes the risk of looking over her shoulder and immediately wishes she hadn't. Blazing petals are swirling up and out from under Sakura's bandages onto her neck and up to her chin, even moving towards her eye, and Sakura is chasing after her at a breakneck pace with her mouth open in a snarl. Ino feels a wave of pressure hit her feet as chakra bursts out from Sakura's solace, giving her a burst of speed that lets her catch up to her and catch her like an animal, grabbing her face and covering it with her whole hand. Ino's flight and fight responses have both failed, so she freezes in place like a fainting goat. She's only distantly aware of her team shouting to her to get a grip or Sasuke screaming for Sakura to stop and pull herself together. She's back in the forest, trapped in a body no one is coming to help, frozen and frightened, and this is Sakura, forehead billboard brow, sweet little bud who hasn't blossomed. She can't have just killed someone, she can't, and now she's bearing down on her like an enemy because she is an enemy. She wears an enemy's face and she's going to kill her. She's going to kill her and leave her for the animals in the forest, and now's your chance, Ino, move. Shikamaru's voice shocks Ino back to reality, where Sakura has taken her hand off her face and is biting down on her lip hard enough to draw blood as the petals recede back beneath the bandage. For a second, Ino can't even believe it had been near, so fucking near, but Sakura had gotten her shit back together and beat it back. And the next second Sakura is surging towards Ino ready to throw a punch, and Ino remembers she's in a battle. She forces her legs to move and runs in to throw a left hook of her own, but by the time she's letting hers fly, Sakura's is already halfway there, and Ino knows she's too late. The world slows down as Sakura's fist comes sailing through the air towards Ino's face. Before she even feels the impact, Ino can feel the electric moment before a lightning strike air of a burst of chakra far larger than it needs to be zooming down Sakura's arm towards her knuckles and soon into Ino's nose. So that's how she'd fought it off. She'd used her fine-tuned chakra control to push all the chakra feeding the curse mark out into this blow. Well, I'll be goddamned, the bud is finally blooming, Ino thinks to herself. It's the last thing she thinks before the chakra and the punch hit her square in the center of her face and she blacks out. Sakura squirms as goosebumps rise along her skin, chattering, "And not to tell you how to do your job." Too late, Anko grumbles. But is it really necessary for my top to be off? Sakura wonders. Trust me, kiddo, if it wasn't your sensei over there would actually be doing this instead of backseat sealing, Anko grouses as she draws in some of the last elements of the seal, but it's a bad look for a dude who's nearly 30 to be tooling around with a topless 12-year-old girl. So if I messed up the parts going over your boobs we'll never know. Well spoken as always, Anko, Kakashi remarks from the pillar he's leaning against. Sakura tries and fails to hold in a snorting chuckle. Anko frowns. Shit, she really is just a kid, isn't she? Even in this cold dark room surrounded by an elaborate seal made in blood meant to keep a dangerous criminal from manipulating her through his brand on her skin, Sakura could still giggle like an academy student. In a way, this is worse than Orochimaru actually getting his fangs in Sasuke. Sasuke's innocence was already gone. Sakura still had at least a piece of hers to lose. Anko finishes off the last character before standing up straight and looking over to Kakashi. "We good to go?" Kakashi goes around the circle, playing very well at being disinterested and casual while surveying every character and every kunai placement like a hawk. Anko knows it's not for her benefit, it's to make sure Sakura's huffing with annoyance instead of shivering with fear. Looks good enough to me, he says with a too loose shrug as he comes back around behind Sakura. She rolls her eyes. "Please take this seriously, sensei." "Trust me, Sakura, I'm as serious as a heart attack," he replies with a fake smile in his voice, stepping back. "Go ahead, Anko." Here goes nothing. Hand signs are easy to remember, so she flies through those like lightning. Curse sealing. She presses her palm to the curse mark and there's a flash of bright light before Sakura tenses up and lets out a shrill cry of pain. The scrolling lines of text come slithering across the floor inward toward the curse mark, crawling up along Sakura's body and settling around the mark in a circle as the 5 petals flash that magma red, trying to get out but not succeeding. Eventually they settle back into their original shape and Sakura's scream peters out. She slumps forward, nearly falling and just barely catching herself before her face hits the cold stone floor. Anko can't help smiling as she kneels down next to Sakura. "There, that should keep you feeling human for a while. Now, listen carefully, that thing will keep the curse mark from acting up, but it's only as strong as you are. If your will falters for even a second, that seal will break, and Sakura's eyes finally glaze over and she loses the fight against passing all the way out, landing cheek first on the stone. And she's gone, Anko sighs. Well, at least she heard the important bits. Kakashi has crossed the distance between them and is shrugging out of his flak jacket, draping it over Sakura. In her sleep she instinctually draws it tighter around herself, and Kakashi's one dark eye crinkles at the corner with a real smile. She grins at him. "Cheeky, so you don't play favorites after all?" "Oh no, I just play least favorites," Kakashi replies. A voice that turns Anko's blood to ice rings out from the darkness. "How charitable of you, you've grown into a fine teacher, Kakashi." Orochimaru appears like a ghost from the shadows, his chalk-white skin the only contrast against his dark hair and fatigues the sound jonin. Of course it had been him, and his grin wide, yet still not quite reaching his eyes. Exactly as she remembers him. Anko leaps to her feet, snakes already writhing out of her sleeve. "You have some fucking nerve, you son of a bitch." Kakashi grabs her roughly by the shoulder. "Don't. If a fight breaks out right now, we're not the ones in danger, Sakura is." Anko's breath catches in her throat. Damn it, he was fucking right. They were the only line of defense between that girl and the monster that wanted to take her away. They were everything Anko wished she'd had when Orochimaru came bearing down on her. So she draws back the snakes and shifts into a defensive position. If you take one step closer, I'll use your blood to paint the walls. Orochimaru's eyebrows arch and he lets out an amused hum. That would give this place some nice color. It's fairly drab in here as is. Kakashi's eye narrows. Why so interested in your mistake, Orochimaru? Orochimaru gasps theatrically, putting a hand to his chest as he looks to Anko. Anko, you tattled on our private conversation? I'd be hurt if it wasn't so predictable. But if you must know, this time his grin reaches his eyes and it's all the worse for it. I plan on turning my mistake into a miracle. I'd say that you don't get to become a legendary Sunin without learning how to make the best of a bad situation, but we all know Tsunade and Jiraiya are notoriously bad at that. Anko can't help cocking her head to the side. You're giving up on the Sharingan. There's more than one way to skin a cat, my dear, Orochimaru replies through an airy laugh. The Sharingan's too lovely to pass up. Kakashi knows all about that. But Sakura is also something quite useful, a blank canvas. She holds infinite possibility, perfect for molding into whatever shape I need. Just like you, Anko. She remembers his pretty words, his assurances that she could be whatever she wanted to be because she wasn't held back by clan expectation or limited by a bloodline technique forcing her into one style of fighting, how the curse mark would give her the raw power she always lacked so she could finally be something, and it's all Anko can do to not be sick. He turns on his heel, walking away from them as he says, I don't need to take you from her. She'll come to me when she's finally sick of being treated like dirt. Orochimaru walks until he's almost entirely shrouded in darkness before he stops. Oh, my, I just had a thought. He turns back to them, tapping his chin as he thinks like a child imitating what he sees on television. Sasuke and Naruto have grown rather attached to Sakura lately, haven't they? It's only natural, they're her teammates after all, but I wonder. What would happen if she were to leave? What would they do? He shrugs, grin back and forth, oh well, I suppose it doesn't matter now. Good luck with the rest of the exam. And he melts into the dark, leaving Kakashi and Anko alone with a passed-out girl and far too much to think about. Sasuke had been frantically discussing Sakura's match with Lee and Naruto and very much not sitting down when Kakashi appears behind the three of them, missing his flak jacket. The shock nearly sends Sasuke pitching over the railing, but Lee and Naruto just barely catch him and help him whirl around to face Kakashi. Sasuke almost can't hear himself in the chorus of the three of them asking Kakashi variations on, is Sakura alright, and where is she? One at a time, you three, Kakashi says, putting his hands up in a warding gesture. Sakura is perfectly fine. She's sleeping soundly in the infirmary, a respectful distance from Ino because we don't know quite how she's going to take defeat once she wakes up. Sasuke purses his lips thanks to that curse mark scare her bed's likely surrounded by Umbu Black Ops, but Kakashi's not going to say as much in front of Naruto and Lee. Kakashi's hand falls on Sasuke's shoulder and while Sasuke flinches he lets him keep it there. She's going to be alright. Just relax and watch the rest of the matches, you might learn something. Sasuke rolls his eyes, shrugging Kakashi's hand off now just for the sake of it. Should I just keep my Sharingan on the whole time? Take notes. I mean sure, if you want to add needing glasses on top of all your other health issues, Kakashi replies, casual as anything. Sasuke's about to shrug that off before he blinks and turns back to Kakashi with a quizzical look. Wait, what? An inactive Sharingan eye is more susceptible to the lens deforming under stress, and the Sharingan itself used even casually can cause deterioration in the eye. He leans down, taps his headband where it covers his eye, and Sasuke doesn't have to see the grin on Kakashi's face to know that it's shit-eating. Why do you think I keep this bad boy covered all the time? Sasuke just stares at him for a moment before eloquently responding, oh. Well, and turning back to the railing. He doesn't get much peace as he tries to watch Temari and Tenten's match. He can feel Naruto staring at him, eyes nearly all the way shut, he's squinting so hard. Sasuke just frowns whatever it is, he has no interest in answering it, so he just ignores it and hopes it'll go away. That tactic rarely works with Naruto, and it doesn't work this time as Naruto leans over to try and get into Sasuke's field of vision, asking, what did happen when I was knocked out? Sasuke just stares ahead as he answers a question with a question, why do you want to know? Naruto holds up one finger. 1. You care a lot more about Sakura than you used to. Sasuke couldn't help but turn to Naruto and blink in confusion. Did he? He didn't feel like he did. Though if Kakashi's observations in the infirmary were any indication, he's probably a poor judge of that. Naruto holds up another finger and Sasuke nearly jumps as Naruto starts, too. I don't know if it was just me, but I saw a weird mark on Sakura's. It is only natural Sasuke would be more attached to Sakura after his ordeal in the forest. Lee cuts in, saving Sasuke's skin. He went without food, water, and sleep to watch over her, and fought with all his strength to protect her. It was really truly admirable. Sasuke can't help arching a brow as he leans on his crutch and turns to Lee. I thought you said you did not like me. Lee's smile is probably as close to a smirk as he can manage. I am still not so sure if I do. But I certainly respect you after seeing your fighting spirit in everything you have done for Sakura. However, please remember, when it comes to her heart, I will not lose to you. Sasuke just shakes his head and turns back to the fight. How about we focus on your teammate? The rest of the preliminaries pass in a flurry of action that Sasuke is both exhausted by and surprised went so fast. When it all finally comes to an end, Tenten puts on a damn fine show, but Temari handily dispatches her. Naruto manages to beat Kiba in the most unimpressive yet classically Naruto way possible in the next two matches. How does he even begin to describe the next two matches? First, Hinata Hyuga vs Neji Hyuga. Neji, the older genin whose skill and poise Sasuke couldn't help but admire, and Hinata, the girl his age he knew from memories of Uchiha and Hyuga rubbing shoulders that are faded but not unpleasant. Neji brutalizes Hinata, striking with a level of cruelty Sasuke hadn't imagined possible, nearly killing her because she deigned to imply he was projecting his issues onto her. And Hinata who's fighting to become stronger and see what she's worth. Hinata keeps fighting even in the face of certain defeat and keeps getting back up. Sasuke doesn't speak much as the fight goes along, and Naruto shouts encouragements to Hinata and everyone else murmurs about how she's certainly going to lose. He just thinks of all the time he spent admiring Neji, all the times they've been compared, and starts to wonder if that was time wasted. He sees Hinata pick herself up, barely able to stand, and his knee aches. And second, Gaara vs Rock Lee. The battle which all others would be compared against for years to come. Lee is absolutely magnificent, his taijutsu immaculate, his speed unmatchable. Sasuke actually does activate his Sharingan, not to take notes but just to see every single moment of Lee's perfect form. Naruto has to keep him from falling over the railing. He's leaning so far, trying to get as close to the action as he can. But Gaara is beyond human. Beyond possibility. Nothing in the world could have prepared Lee for Gaara. Lee does as well as he possibly could against him, but that's like saying Lee did as well as he could against a typhoon. Gaara even behaves like something unnatural, something more, or perhaps less than human. He does not move, he only acts. Lee pushes and pushes and pushes. He pushes so hard he destroys the arena floor. And when he cannot push anymore, when opening the gates puts him past the point of no return and Gaara has crushed his arm and leg and Lee isn't even conscious, he stands up. And pushes. A thought begins to form in Sasuke's head. Maybe, he thinks, maybe this is what strength looks like. Lee may never like Sasuke. But Sasuke's not ashamed to admit he admires Lee. And it becomes quite a bit harder for Sasuke to feel sorry for himself when he hears that Lee's injuries mean his days as a shinobi are over. Sasuke doesn't remember the last two matches very well. He knows Koji lost to Shino and Yoroi fought and lost an additional round against Shikamaru. The Hokage explains to the finalists that the final exam will be in 1 month, so they have time to train and dignitaries have time to arrive, and he lays out the bracket via random draw. Sasuke nearly throws up when Sakura is matched against Gaara. Naruto immediately starts trying to negotiate, or Sasuke supposes a better term is, yell until someone gives up, desperately trying to take Sakura's place, but the Hokage and the proctors stand firm. Sasuke can hear Kakashi swear under his breath behind him. With Naruto pitted against Neji and Sasuke out of commission, their luck could hardly be worse. Due to the nature of Sasuke's injuries making the trip from his home to the hospital unfeasible, Kakashi and Hakume already set him up a room in the hospital. All the others who lost in the preliminaries have been moved there as well. Sasuke's dreading seeing what happens when Lee wakes up. But there's a silver lining. Despite the high security, Kakashi tells him that he can sneak Sasuke into Sakura's room once she wakes up, though his motives aren't entirely unselfish. I think she'll take the news better if she hears it from you, Kakashi remarks in a tired whisper. Sasuke's not about to disagree. Sasuke has to wait in his room until Sakura wakes up, and Naruto stays with him until visiting hours are over, rambling about all the half-baked strategies he has in mind to beat Neji. Sasuke does try to give some advice, but mostly ends up being talked over, so he settles for the usual making fun of Naruto until Naruto tries to jump him and the nurses have to pull them apart. It's definitely not good for Sasuke's health. But it makes him feel normal, so he doesn't care. Sakura doesn't wake up until around the middle of the night, at which time Hakume lets him in with a warm smile and a whisper of, "Don't get too crazy in there, Romeo. You both need your rest." Sasuke rolls his eyes probably a lot harder than he needs to, hobbling over to the chair near Sakura's bed. She's already turned to look at him, eyes half open but somehow bright with excitement. It's only when he sits down that he realizes he's smiling, just a little bit. He's not sure how to start, so he just says, "Good morning." Sakura frowns. It's dark out. It's a minute or so after midnight, so technically it's morning, Sasuke replies, shrugging his good shoulder. That gets a soft snicker out of her. "What did I miss?" she asks, slowly shifting so she's propped up on one elbow. Sasuke could go through the whole thing beat by beat. In fact, he wants nothing more. He wants to tell her about how he'd never seen a technique like Tamari's, how Shikamaru astounded him with that simple but brilliant strategy, Naruto's ridiculous victory, Hinata's courage, Lee's tragedy, all of it. But what ends up coming out of his mouth in a sheepish rush is, "You're fighting Gaara in the third exam." Sakura first just stares at him, jaw falling open. She blinks, slowly at first then rapidly. Then her eyes slide closed and she mutters, "Fuck." Sasuke can't help it. He's laughing. He's doing all he can to keep it quiet and make it stop, but he can't. After everything that's happened in the last week, all he can do is double over laughing like an academy student hearing his first dirty joke. And soon Sakura's joining him, unable to keep upright on one arm and flopping back down to the bed, throwing her arm over her eyes and just giggling helplessly. For that moment, for the first time in far too long, Sasuke finally feels like he's just a kid. Check the description for the links to the author.